Chapter 1. I'm Not a Thief. In the orphanage's dormitory, a 9-year-old girl's eyes reddened as she faced everyone's questioning. She had a pair of big watery eyes and was beautiful, but due to her malnutrition, she looked a little thin. Seeing that everyone was looking at her with disdain and contempt, she choked with sobs. That jade pendant was originally mine. I am not a thief. My mother left it to me. So you're saying that I stole something from you? Standing in front of her was a girl around her age. She tilted her head and glared at her coldly, then smiled innocently. Compared to her, this girl had a sweet appearance and an arrogant expression. She was like a high and mighty little princess who was doted on by everyone. As soon as she finished speaking, the children around her immediately stood up to defend her. You're lying. You're lying. Why would Rower steal something from you? That's right. How is that possible? How could Rower be a thief? You're the one who stole something from her. Faced with all the children's accusations and questions, the girl was unable to defend herself. She felt extremely wronged, so she rubbed her eyes and cried. That's really my jade pendant. Sob sob. Give it back to me. Rower glanced at her proudly, then turned to everyone and said, Everyone, look at it clearly. Xiao sure is a thief, so don't play with her anymore. Thief bad bad. A few of the children nodded. Yes, yes. We'll listen to Princess Ro, and ignore her from now on. She's a thief. She's a thief. Xiao sure is a bad child. She stole Rower's things, so shameful. The children laughed and dispersed, leaving the girl alone against the wall. She looked at their backs with tears in her eyes and secretly clenched her fists. Outside the director's office, there was a row of men in black suits. An old man who was over 50 years old sat on the sofa with a serious expression. He looked very energetic, and his tang suit made him look noble. There was a sharp aura between his brows. Even though he was old and his face was slightly aged, his handsome facial features were enough to make one imagine how handsome he was when he was young. The director found a stack of documents and slowly flipped it open in front of him. He respectfully handed it over. Mr. Mu, these are the children who were admitted last year. All the children's information is here. Please take a look. The old man flipped through a few pages and frowned slightly after a few glances. The assistant beside him glanced at his expression and looked up at the director with a smile. That child is about 8 or 9 years old. May I ask, among the children who were admitted last year, how many of them fit this age? The dean recalled for a moment and hurriedly said, Please wait a moment. The old man lowered his eyes and glanced around, but his gaze was fixed on a family portrait. He suddenly stretched out his hand and pointed at it. Let me see this girl. The dean was stunned for a moment before nodding. All right, I'll arrange for her to meet you right away. She made a call, and not long after, a teacher walked in with a girl. Rower obediently stood in front of the old man. With her hands behind her back and her chest puffed out, she said with a smile, Grandpa. Hello. My name is Rower. The old man stared at her expressionlessly. His gaze carefully sized up every inch of her face. His eyes slowly narrowed, and his gaze was deep and gloomy. Rower furrowed her brows curiously. She felt that this grandpa looked very fierce. She seemed to be frightened by his meticulous expression and couldn't help but take 2 steps back. However, the old man rushed over and waved at her. Come, let Grandpa take a good look at you. Okay. Rower hesitantly took 2 steps forward. The old man gently held her shoulders and looked at her carefully. Even though the age matched, he felt that no matter whether it was the eyebrows or facial features, they didn't look alike. His gaze slowly moved down and landed on the jade pendant between her collarbones. The old man touched the jade pendant and asked in a deep voice, This jade pendant? Rower was stunned. She smiled sweetly and said, This jade pendant was given to me by my mother. The old man's gaze froze. Seeing this, the assistant hurriedly took out another jade pendant from his briefcase and handed it over. The 2 jade pendants were put together and fit tightly. The old man's hand trembled slightly. Seeing this, the assistant understood. He walked over and whispered a few words to the dean. Then, he took out a huge check from his briefcase and handed it to the dean. The dean received it with a smile. A row of luxurious black cars was parked at the entrance of the Welfare Institute. The girl looked lonely as she held onto the black iron bars. Her eyes were listless as she watched Rower follow a group of men in suits and get into a stretch Bentley. The moment the car door closed, Rower looked in her direction coldly. Inadvertently, their gazes met in the air. Rower smiled slyly. The car window slowly rolled up and the car sped away. Chapter 2. In the corner of the corridor of the hospital, the accompanying secretary was holding a mobile phone and a report in his hand. Yoon Shirshir, 18 years old, student. Her father's company was not good at running and went bankrupt. Everything has been verified. The examination shows that she is very healthy and will not cause any trouble for the child's custody. However, this girl's body did not meet the conditions for artificial insemination, so it could only be done in another way. Yoon Shirshir sat motionless on the bench and looked at the scenery outside the window. Her face was strangely calm, but the depths of her watery eyes were gray. Although she was very young and her delicate facial features were even younger than her actual age, there was a faint vicissitude on her young face that did not match her age. She was 1 in a million to be chosen. With her beautiful appearance, the employer's remuneration was also very generous. 5 million yuan was an astronomical figure for her. 3 days ago, she secretly signed the contract behind her father's back and was inexplicably brought here. Every day, she was locked in this room and was not allowed to talk to the outside world, let alone go out, like a patient who was quarantined. She knew that in order to prepare for pregnancy, she had to ensure that her body was healthy. This way, her body could better cooperate with the pregnancy. The 3 meals a day were very exquisite. Ham, bacon, bread, and beef were almost luxurious to the extreme. She knew that these were all meals that were beneficial for people who were preparing for pregnancy. Although they were all things that she did not like to eat, she could only endure the discomfort and swallow with difficulty. Yoon Shirshir did not dare to disobey any orders, because obedience was one of the conditions in the contract. Until today, she followed the employer's secretary to this private institution to be checked. This employer was very mysterious. She had not even seen his face. She only knew that a contract was signed with a remuneration of 5 million yuan. 5 million yuan should be enough to help her father through the crisis. Regarding this matter, she did not dare to mention it to her father. When she left, she only left a note and left without saying goodbye. With a long surrogate pregnancy, she was afraid that she would not be able to return home for a period of time. Therefore, she did not have to worry about how to face her father for the time being. According to the requirements of the contract, she had to be observed at all times until she was pregnant. With this as a condition, 1 million would be transferred to her father's account in advance before tomorrow. According to the secretary, if she gave birth to a boy, she would be paid an extra sum of money. Surrogacy, heh. Speaking of which, it was really funny. In order to get money, she had thought of all kinds of ways, but in the end, she had never thought that she would get paid by selling her own body. However, it was a generous sum after all, and she was tempted in the end. In her moment of desperation, she chose this unbearable path. Lin Hai, a luxurious villa with a sea view. The villas in this area monopolized the most beautiful scenery by the sea. Therefore, the expensive land prices were self-evident. After she tidied up a little, a luxurious car drove her here. After giving her some instructions, the driver left. The secretary told her that he would come tonight. Yoon Shirshir took a deep breath. She was no longer in the mood to enjoy the beautiful seascape. She dragged her luggage into the villa with a heavy expression. At night, in the luxurious bedroom, the curtains were tightly drawn, blocking all the light. In the quiet room, she took a shower and lay quietly on the king-size bed. Her eyes were covered, and she lost her sense of sight. However, her hearing was much sharper, and she could hear the sea breeze and waves outside the villa. Chapter 3. There were no neon lights in the city, but it was so calm that it made one's scalp tingle. Then, she heard the sound of a car engine approaching. The car stopped in front of the villa and the engine was turned off. At that moment, her usually calm heart suddenly tightened. She felt an unprecedented nervousness and panic. Until she heard the sound of footsteps coming up the stairs, getting closer and closer, she couldn't pretend to be calm anymore. While she was feeling uneasy, the door was pushed open. Along with the steady footsteps, Yoon Shirshir could feel that someone had walked in and stopped beside her bed. She was so nervous that she sat up on the bed immediately. He was here. Was it her employer? While she was feeling uneasy, the bed collapsed slightly and someone sat by the bed. Yoon Shirshir leaned against the wall nervously, feeling very awkward. Luckily, it was suffocating darkness in front of her and she could only see a tall figure. Even so, she still felt helpless. Although she couldn't see his face, she could feel his strong and oppressive aura, especially that cold gaze. It was an aggressive aura that only belonged to a king, like a noble and arrogant overlord. And she, in front of him, was like a tribute from ancient times. Yun Shusher opened her mouth and said awkwardly, "You? Who are you?" The man didn't make a sound. He moved his body and leaned forward slightly, getting closer to her. Yun Shusher could only feel an intimidating aura. Then, the tall figure pressed down on her, completely imprisoning her under his body. Her body trembled as she bore his weight. She curled up into a ball and couldn't move anymore. Her hands were clasped in front of her chest nervously. She almost suffocated. Without waiting for her to react, the man narrowed his eyes and lifted up her shirt. Her soft and fair skin was exposed to the air. His large palm suddenly reached in. "Wait," she suddenly said in a trembling voice. Can I see you?" "Why?" The man's young and deep voice was like a mellow red wine, extremely magnetic. "I can't see anything. I'm scared." He sneered so softly that it couldn't be heard. "You don't need to see it, and you don't need to be afraid." Her young and tender body had yet to fully develop, and this girl was still so young and inexperienced. Her small waist could be completely grasped with one hand. His ice-cold fingers rubbed her lips heavily, and he couldn't stop. "Just close your eyes." The tender feeling was so wonderful, as smooth as silk. His fingertips were slightly wet and cold. When they touched her warm skin, she couldn't help but shiver. The darkness before her eyes intensified the uneasiness in her heart. The man's thin lips curled. Apparently, he felt that this dress was too much of a hindrance. With a rip sound, he tore it apart. His violent actions made Yun Shusher as stiff as a rock, not daring to move. His heart was beating like thunder, as if it was about to jump out of his throat. Shame, panic, and fear almost suffocated her. At this moment, she suddenly began to regret. Previously, she thought that she could do it. She thought that it was just giving birth to a child for him. Although she had no experience, women had to experience it sooner or later. However, facing this strange and domineering man in front of her, she no longer had the courage she had before. She was terrified to the extreme. Chapter 4. He lowered his head and ignored her uneasiness and fear. His thin lips brushed across her collarbone, causing her to tremble. She was even more sensitive to his aggression. Yun Shusher's breathing quickened. She instinctively reached out and grabbed his large palm, trying to stop him from violating her. The man seemed to have read her mind and easily tied her hands up and raised them above her head. She was shocked. Her heart kept making useless resistance. She was so scared that her entire body was trembling, but she couldn't reject him. Yun Shusher shrunk her shoulders and tried to avoid him. However, she didn't know that the unintentional friction made the man's body even hotter. The man sucked in a breath of cold air with a hiss and almost lost control. This girl was really too alluring, and he almost couldn't control himself. Yun Shusher's heart trembled from this overly intimate action. Her shoulders shivered and she instinctively pushed him away. "Don't!" The man acted as if he didn't hear her and ignored her small resistance. Yun Shusher gasped and subconsciously struggled. Her small hands kept pushing the man's chest, but her wrists were suddenly held tightly by him. Not allowing her to resist, the man removed his last bit of cover and realized what was going to happen next. Yun Shusher was a little out of breath and didn't want his touch. Her body sank and she wanted to hide in a world that he couldn't enter. His domineering attitude seemed to have frightened her. Don't. Mu Yaja was extremely unhappy with her resistance. He slowly looked up and pinched her chin. Looking down, he used the hazy moonlight to look at her shy and helpless little face and asked coldly, "Why? You don't want to?" Yun Shusher was stunned and pursed her lips. The man narrowed his eyes and his fingertips cruelly twisted her lips. "Woman, do you know what you're supposed to do here?" Her face suddenly froze and her body kept trembling. She didn't know if it was because of the pain or because she was afraid of his coldness. After a long silence, her voice was almost hoarse and broken. "I know. Then do you need me to teach you what to do?" He raised his sword-like eyebrows and said in a cold voice. Yun Shusher bit her lips hard. Her eyes turned sour and she felt a line of moisture flowing into her mouth. Her mouth was full of bitterness. She knew that this was just a routine. There was no emotional connection between them. This relationship was only built on the level of a contract. There was nothing else mixed in. However, this humiliation was something that she could not bear no matter what. Muyaja coldly curled his lips. He did not intend to give her any time to adapt. He grabbed her hands and raised them above her head. The corners of his mouth curled up almost cruelly. "Open your mouth." The expression on Yun Shusher's face became numb little by little. She then closed her eyes in despair, hugged his shoulders with difficulty, and buried her face in his neck. At that moment, she knew that she had stepped into the abyss of sin. The man was satisfied with her submission and suddenly sank into. The feeling of breaking through that barrier was so clear. Yun Shusher gritted her teeth and endured it. Her voice was as hoarse as a hiss. She gasped. Amidst the excruciating pain, her body tensed up and stiffened like a rock. She couldn't move anymore. An excruciating pain that she had never felt before seemed to be tearing her apart. At that moment, her vision turned black and she almost fainted from the pain. Chapter 5. He had no time to care about her pain and wanted her unscrupulously. To him, this was just a matter of love. No man liked to waste time on this, let alone with a woman who had no feelings for him. Protective feelings for the fairer sex? He was her employer and had given her a considerable amount of remuneration. She deserved to bear this pain. That sudden pain, coupled with the grievance and bitterness she felt, caused tears to flow out of her eyes. She hissed in pain, her eyes turning red, but she stubbornly bit her lips, not wanting to reveal her weak side. However, she couldn't bear such intense pain, and she couldn't stop moaning. Gradually, she couldn't hold it in any longer, and she began to sob intermittently. Woo-woo. In the end, she started to sob like a kitten. He went deep, collided, and cruelly plundered everything from her. The boundless pain was like the fierce waves on the sea. She was drowning, floating up and down. Gradually, she forgot her feelings. Her gaze gradually became distant. Her 5 fingers trembled as she opened them, but she could not grab anything to cling to. Her vision was dark, and her mind was in chaos. It was a perfect fit. Sweat ironed the 2 intertwined bodies. Muyaja's 5 fingers fiercely entered her hair. He only wanted to taste the marrow. Her mind was in a daze as she begged. Her body passively catered to him. In the midst of his passion, he suddenly felt a hot wetness on his neck. He looked up slightly, only to see her biting her lips. She was sobbing in pain. Muyaja's handsome face was stunned. Looking at her forbearing face, he could not help but lower his head and kiss her heavily on the lips. The tip of his tongue invaded her mouth and captured the lilac snake. It twined around and engulfed her, swallowing her choked moans. Kissing was a taboo for him. Kissing meant helping each other in difficult times. He would never kiss a woman. Because in his eyes, a woman's lips were very dirty. The women who lingered around him had always been socialites or actresses in the entertainment industry. Because he had never touched a woman. However, he did not know why he kissed this woman. To be precise, this was his first woman. He did not know that the taste of kissing was so delicious. Muyaja's eyes narrowed slightly as he pressed down on her. In the midst of a suffocating tightening, he pushed forward with all his might. On the bed, they were deeply entangled. Bone erosion oblivion. Yun Shusher opened her eyes in the darkness. The red silk covering her eyes was already soaked with cold sweat. She heard the sound of the shower running in the bathroom. She moved her body slightly, but felt a sharp pain coming from her fingertips. It turned out that her 5 fingers were tightly gripping the edge of the bed, and her nails had broken and pierced into her fingertips. She pretended to be relaxed and comforted herself. Everything was over. Everything was over. Hopefully, this time, she would be able to conceive successfully. After she gave birth to his child and got the money, she could leave this place and return to her own life. At this moment, it was already early in the morning. Muyaja took a shower and changed his clothes. His tall figure stood in the room, giving off an oppressive feeling. His gaze was cold. Under the moonlight, the woman was curled up in the white bedding, panting non-stop with her body hunched over. His rough marks were left on her smooth and clean body. The blood stain on the bed was like a blood-red bud that bloomed. It was a ghastly sight. Yun Shirshir lay on the bed motionlessly with her back facing him. Her body was curled up as she trembled. She was as stiff as a rock. He looked at her. Her messy hair was draped over the pillow, drenched in sweat. Chapter 6. Bang! Hearing the cold sound of the door closing, she hugged her shoulders and looked at the terrible bruises on her wrists. Her eyes were sore and swollen, but she didn't dare to cry, even if it was a choked sob. Soon, the sound of an engine starting came from outside the window. The car sped away until she couldn't hear it anymore. Realizing that he had left, she couldn't hold it in anymore. She suddenly closed her eyes and let herself cry bitterly. In this unfamiliar seaside villa, she had completely given her inexperienced self to a strange man. She had also wondered why that person had chosen her. Later on, she thought that it was probably because of her identity as a commoner. She wouldn't pose any threat to the child's custody in the future. She didn't know if this was the right thing to do, nor did she know how long it would be difficult to hide this from her father. But now that her family was at a dead end, she had no other choice. But she didn't regret it, and there was no place for her to regret it. For a person who had difficulty making ends meet, dignity was too extravagant. This was her only way out now. Moreover, as the family's adopted daughter, her father had been very good to her these past few years and treated her like his own. Although her adoptive mother and sister didn't like her, she had never lacked food and clothing in life. She was already deeply grateful for this. Now that the financial crisis and her family was in danger, this kindness had to be repaid no matter what. She didn't want to think too much about other things for the time being. Mu Yaja wouldn't know that this night would leave an indelible scar in her life. He also didn't know how this woman would interact with him in the future. Dawn, the first rays of the morning sun. Yun Shirshir slowly sat up and slowly took off the red silk on her face. She wrapped the snow-white quilt tightly around her body and walked to the window to open the curtains. However, the sunlight couldn't shine into her heart. Outside the door, there were hurried footsteps. The door was pushed open. Yun Shirshir was shocked. She turned around and saw a dignified and gorgeous woman walk in and approach her with an angry face. Behind her was the secretary who had signed the surrogacy contract with her. Her head was lowered as she walked to the side. The woman walked in front of her and stood still. She arrogantly looked her up and down, but her face was full of disgust. When her gaze fell on the kiss mark on her body, her gaze froze. Yun Shirshir nervously wrapped the quilt around her body, but she couldn't hide the traces of love on her neck. The woman's eyes were filled with a mix of green and red, and her eyes stung as she spat out fiercely. "You're that surrogate girl?" Yun Shirshir gulped. "Yes, and you are. Pa." What she got in response was a ruthless slap. "Shameless bitch. You. What right do you have? What right do you have?" The woman grabbed her hair in exasperation, her face pale. "Don't think that just because you gave birth to his child, you can rely on your son's status. I'm warning you, I'm his legitimate fiancé, and you're just a borrowed child. Don't covet something that doesn't belong to you, understand?" Yun Shirshir was stunned and said with difficulty, "I signed the contract, and I know the terms clearly. I also know my identity, please." Chapter 7. You'd better get pregnant this time. Don't expect him to lay a finger on you again. The woman spat out those harsh words and left. Yun Shirshir slumped to the ground, her soul in a daze. The secretary hurriedly helped her up. "Get up quickly, the floor is cold. Your health is more important." 2 months later. At the Mu family's private hospital, the secretary received the examination report. 7 weeks of pregnancy. The fetus was stable. It was a pair of identical twins. She picked up her phone and reported the results to Mu Yaja's assistant. Yun Shirshir walked out of the consultation room. She didn't care about the results of the examination at all. She was like a puppet at the mercy of others. No matter what, she only cared about doing her job and following all their arrangements. She didn't have to worry about anything else. The secretary walked over and smiled at her. "Miss Yun, your condition is very stable now. Don't be too nervous. Haha, you don't have to worry about anything else. You can stay in the villa and take care of the fetus for the next few months. If you have any requests, just let me know." Yun Shirshir looked up and said softly, "I want to see my father." 2 months ago, she left only a note and left without saying goodbye. He must be worried sick now. The secretary was stunned. This The CEO has instructed that you can't go out. I just want to see my father. I don't have any other requests. Can't you fulfill this simple request? Looking at Yoon Shersher's pleading eyes, the secretary nodded reluctantly. All right. This matter was very difficult for her. According to the terms of the contract, she couldn't go out. However, the secretary felt that this girl was too pitiful. She came out to be a surrogate at such a young age. She must have some difficulties. So without telling the CEO, she arranged a time for her. The location was at a coffee shop in the city center. Father Yoon received the text message and hurried over half an hour early. He sat in the private room and was a little restless. Ever since she left without saying goodbye, he had been so worried that he couldn't sleep at night. He tossed and turned in bed, and his wife often scolded her in front of him, saying that she was an ungrateful wretch who ran away with some wild man and had no conscience. The family was about to collapse, and in the midst of a crisis, Father Yoon did not know where she had gone. However, when he found out that there was an extra million in his bank account the next day, he subconsciously made a bad association with her departure. In fact, Yoon Shersher was not his biological daughter. He had accidentally adopted her from the orphanage 10 years ago. He already had a daughter. At that time, the Yoon family was rich. When he saw that Yoon Shersher was sensible and well-behaved, he liked her. Unexpectedly, after he brought her back, he was rejected by his wife and daughter. At that time, he didn't take it to heart. He thought that the little fellow was so sensible that she would be recognized by his wife and daughter sooner or later. However, he was wrong. He was usually busy and didn't have time to care about the trivial matters at home. However, he was a father after all. How could he not know how his wife and daughter bullied Yoon Shersher when he wasn't around? However, Yoon Shersher was sensible after all. Even if she was wronged in front of the two of them, she had never cried to him. It wasn't that he didn't feel guilty towards her. Chapter 8. In fact, his family used to be very wealthy. There was a listed asset under his name, and the profits were stable, so his life was considered wealthy. However, at the beginning of this year, a financial crisis swept across the world, and the sudden disaster crushed the entire family. The company suffered losses again and again, and many shareholders withdrew their investments. Seeing that the company was about to go bankrupt, his wife pointed the finger at Yoon Shersher. This was because last year, in order to keep her away from this trivial family, he didn't hesitate to use the money that he had originally intended to invest to send her to a boarding school for aristocrats. His wife believed that if it weren't for that incident, the company wouldn't have encountered this crisis, and the Yoon family wouldn't have fallen into such a situation. Because of this, there were often arguments in the family. What's more, when Yoon Shersher returned home during the holidays, the mother and daughter took advantage of his absence to beat her up. Father Yoon was so angry that he almost had a heart attack. Just as he was burning with anxiety, he saw the door open. The secretary opened the door, and Yoon Shersher slowly walked in. When she saw Father Yoon, her eyes moved slightly and became misty, but she immediately calmed down. Father Yoon suddenly stood up, but glanced at the secretary with some suspicion in his eyes. The secretary sensibly left the room and closed the door for them. Shersher. Father Yoon walked over anxiously, held her shoulders, and looked at her. Where have you been for the past 2 months? Do you know how worried father has been these 2 months? Yoon Shersher looked up guiltily. She hadn't seen Father Yoon for 2 months, but his hair was already gray, and his face looked more weary. Thinking about it, he had been worried for so many days. The company's cases were piled up into mountains, and he had been looking for her in his free time. He had exhausted himself on both sides. Father, don't worry about me. I'm fine, Yoon Shersher said as she helped him sit down. How's the company now? Were you the one who made the money? Father Yoon went straight to the point. Yoon Shersher was startled and didn't know how to answer. A hint of panic flashed through her eyes, but she quickly hid it. Father Yoon tightly covered the back of her hand. Good child, tell me the truth. Don't lie to father. Don't let father worry about you anymore, okay? He suddenly thought of something terrifying. He sat up straight and hurriedly asked, Did you do something stupid? Seeing that her head was lowered and she didn't say anything, he searched her face for any clues, but to no avail. Suddenly, he pointed suspiciously at the door. Who was that woman just now? Yoon Shersher was silent for a long time. Her voice was as soft as a mosquito's. I'm a surrogate. The room suddenly fell into a dead silence. Father Yun's pupils contracted as he looked at her in disbelief. You? How could you? Dad. Before she could finish speaking, a slap was heard. Father Yun had suddenly slapped her face to the side. Yun Shishir touched her burning cheeks in a daze. She heard him question her fiercely. Why did you degrade yourself like this? Surrogacy. Is that something you can do? She was still so young and in the prime of her life. Yet she actually went to be a surrogate. Did she know that doing so would destroy her? Was he such a coward in her eyes as a father? Could he not even protect his daughter well? I won't touch a single cent of that money. I, Yun Yeching, have yet to reach such a state. With that, he stood up angrily and left the private room in a huff. Chapter 9. 6 months later. Yun Shishir, accompanied by her secretary, went through the procedures to resume her university studies. On the way there, she suddenly had a severe abdominal pain. After a few months of fear and unforeseen premature labor, she could not be sent to the Mu family's private hospital in time. The secretary hurriedly drove her to the city's maternity hospital and calmly went through the procedures. Yun Shishir lay on the bed with a pale face. She looked up at the incandescent lights that kept flashing. Under the intense pain, she was drenched in cold sweat. After 8 months of pregnancy, she was finally free. The secretary sent her to the delivery room and kept encouraging her. Miss Yun, don't be afraid. Both you and your child will be safe. I'll wait for your good news outside the operating room. Thank you. Yun Shishir was pushed into the delivery room with her eyes closed. The door was tightly shut. The hospital's director was familiar with Yun Yeching, so when he learned that Yun Shishir was about to give birth, he contacted him. When Yun Yeching heard the news, he immediately rushed to the hospital and waited anxiously outside the delivery room. 4 hours later, a loud baby cry was heard from the delivery room. It's a healthy boy. The nurse carried the child into the incubator and sent him to the neonatal ward. Yun Yeching did not care about the child as he anxiously looked outside the delivery room. The secretary walked to the front of the ward and looked at the child through the window. She turned around and asked, "Where's the other child?" The nurse replied regretfully, "I'm really sorry." Because he was born prematurely, the younger brother was too weak and stopped breathing when he came out. The secretary was shocked and asked with a stiff face, "Is there no hope?" The nurse said bluntly, "Yes." The secretary was a little disappointed and said helplessly, "All right then. I'll have to trouble your hospital to deal with the child." With that, she picked up her phone and contacted a few of her subordinates and an ambulance, intending to transfer the child to the Mu family's private hospital. Before she left, she filled out a check and handed it to Yun Yeching, saying politely, "Mr. Yun, your daughter has suffered for the past few months. This is the remaining payment. Please accept it." He accepted it hesitantly, and the secretary hurriedly left with her men. In the delivery room, Yun Shishir was exhausted and fainted. The nurse walked over and was about to pick up and deal with the poor baby boy. However, just as she picked up the little guy, she looked down and was slightly shocked. Her expression changed drastically, and she ran to the doctor with the child in her arms in a panic. Doctor. 6 years later. In the department store, Yun Shishir pushed her cart and looked around from time to time. Her footsteps were hurried. Just now, she had gone to the daily necessities shelf to grab something. When she turned around, she was gone. She had no idea where she had gone. When she passed by the toy department, she slowed down her pace and looked around. Suddenly, her gaze landed on a small figure. Yun Shishir shrugged slightly and sighed helplessly. Her lips curled into a smile as she pushed the cart towards him and squatted down behind him. He saw the little guy standing in front of the shelf, looking intently at the beautifully packaged remote control car on the counter. Little Munchkin looked very young, about 5 or 6 years old. He was wearing a clean school uniform, but he looked a little thin. With thick, silky black hair, fair jade-like skin, and a youthful face with exquisite facial features and rosy cheeks, he was quite adorable. He had a pair of big watery eyes that sparkled and were clear and beautiful. The corners of his eyes were long and curved, and his thick eyelashes were long and curly. They were slightly upturned, like 2 black phoenix feathers. His jet-black eyes were as pure and clear as black jade, without a trace of impurities. Chapter 10. The charming and adorable little fellow was just like a beautiful little elf. However, This little elf's gaze was a little serious, and he had the maturity of a little adult. 150 yuan, it's too expensive. His tender voice was filled with the vicissitudes of life that didn't match his age. He frowned like an old man and counted with his little fingers. Then, he sighed sadly and shrugged his shoulders, as though he was in a gloomy world. Yun Shirshir couldn't help but laugh at his gloomy appearance, but she felt a little bitter inside. She pursed her lips and patted his shoulder. Little Munchkin was shocked and turned around. Seeing that it was her, his cheeks turned red. Mommy has been looking for you for a long time. Didn't I tell you to be good and follow Mommy around and not run off on your own? Yun Shirshir pretended to be fierce, and Little Munchkin felt even more guilty. He carefully hugged her neck and looked down. Blinking his big eyes, he said softly, Mommy, don't be angry. Yu won't run off on his own in the future. Yu, be good. She squatted down and hugged him. What are you looking at? Yu instinctively pointed at the remote-controlled racing car. Then, he suddenly thought of something and retracted his little finger. Looking up, he pretended to be nonchalant and said, Mommy, Yu is just looking at it. I don't want it at all. Even though he said that, the little fellow's eyes were still fixed on the exquisitely packaged remote-controlled racing car. His eyes had completely betrayed him. Yun Shirshir couldn't help but feel cold. The little fellow was so young, but he didn't mean what he said. He obviously wanted it, but he was just trying to save money for her. That was why he was putting on a brave front. This child was a natural considerate boy. She smiled and patted his little head. Standing up, she walked to the counter and pointed at the remote-controlled racing car. Yu stared at the toy car, then glanced at Yun Shirshir. As though he had guessed something, his eyes lit up and his face glowed with excitement. He ran to the counter and looked up at the exquisite packaging in the counter staff's hands, unable to take his eyes off it. The counter staff brought the racing car to the counter and swiped the label. Little Munchkin held onto the counter and ran over, standing on his tiptoes with a satisfied look on his face. Yun Shirshir followed behind him. Seeing his bright smile, she couldn't help but be moved. If she couldn't even fulfill her child's small wish, she really wasn't a good mother. All these years, she owed this child too much. Chapter 11. After a round of emergency treatment, he was finally saved. However, this child's body was too weak. He had been sick since he was young, and he did not have a father. Hence, she doted on him to the bone. She wanted to give him more care and to let him understand that without a father, he would only receive more love and not less. Hence, she named him Yun Tianyu. While thanking the heavens for protecting him, she also hoped that he could grow up healthily. As for him, her father helped her keep the matter of him a secret. At that time, the hospital's director was on good terms with him and had secretly tampered with the records for her. Hence, that man did not know about it, and Yu could stay by her side and not be taken away by that man. If that man knew of Yu's existence, she did not dare to imagine how hopeless it would be to lose Yu. After that, she went back to university to continue her studies. Her father's company couldn't hold on in the end, so he filed bankruptcy procedures with the court. The man kept his promise. After giving birth to a child for him, he paid her a considerable sum of money. It was even more than what was stated in the contract. He was indeed rich and overbearing. This also reduced her burden by quite a bit. With this hefty sum, she more or less paid off her father's debts. After the company collapsed, Yun Yeching started from scratch. However, he was old and had experienced a low point in his life. With too many concerns around him, he was no longer as high-spirited as before. He no longer dared to work hard and suffered setbacks repeatedly. Her adoptive mother, Li Qin, had lost her wealth and status. She hated marrying a useless old man like Yun Yeching even more. She was originally a housewife and was forced to do odd jobs to make ends meet. However, she had always been a rich wife. As a result, she developed a crafty character and could not stay at her job for long. When she was disliked outside, she would vent her anger on the mother and son when she returned home. Her sister, Yun Na, had average grades. She did not get into university in the college entrance examination, so she simply enrolled in a vocational school. However, her character had always caused trouble, and there were often some hooligans who came looking for trouble. After graduation, she did not do proper work. She had high standards but little ability. Unable to find a job, she rested at home and spent her days entangled with those hooligans. Now, the whole family was relying on their father's meager income, and they were often restless. They often went to nightclubs and caused a lot of trouble. When Yu was just born, she was breastfeeding. It was the toughest time for her. She couldn't even finish her confinement properly because she skipped a grade and was admitted to a prestigious school. She had a lot of work to do in university, and in her free time, she had to make up for the homework she missed. She was also busy working and raising Yu. Her body almost collapsed under the pressure. After graduating from university, she found a job with a good salary, which improved her family's condition. However, now that her mother and sister were resting at home, she was worried that Yu would be ignored and ostracized by them when she went to work, just like how she had been treated in the Yun family. Back then when she carried Yu home, Yun Na sneered coldly. She still could not let go of that call of little b******. Therefore, after she started working, she moved out of the Yun family with Yu and rented a house for the two of them. Usually, when she went to work, she would send Yu to kindergarten and wait for her at the school gate after school. Chapter 12. When Yu was born, she was breastfeeding, and it was the most difficult time for her. She couldn't even finish her confinement properly because she skipped a grade and was accepted into a prestigious school. Her university studies were heavy, and she had to make up for the homework she missed in her free time. She was also busy working, and she had to raise Yu. Her body almost collapsed. After graduating from university, she found a job with a good salary, and her family's conditions improved. However, now that her mother and sister were resting at home, she was worried that Yu would be treated coldly and ostracized by them when she went to work, just like how she used to be treated in the Yun family. When she carried Yu home, Yun Na sneered coldly. She still couldn't let go of that call of a little bastard. Hence, after she started working, she moved out of the Yun family with Yu and rented an apartment for the two of them. Usually, when she went to work, she would send Yu to kindergarten and wait for her at the school gate after school. Fortunately, Yu was very sensible. Although he was young, he was very considerate and rarely acted willfully. Now, he even learned to go home alone without her. When she walked out of the mall, the sun was shining brightly. The little guy followed behind her with a toy in his arms, and his steps gradually slowed down. It was the middle of summer, and he seemed to be a little uncomfortable walking out of the cool environment. Yu raised his little face and called softly, "Mommy!" Yun Shusher turned around and saw his red face and tired eyebrows. She quickly took the toy for him and frowned worriedly. "What's wrong? Yu, are you feeling unwell?" Yu frowned and spread his arms at her. He said coquettishly, "Mommy, it's so hot. Yu can't walk anymore. Piggyback. Piggyback." Yun Shusher was stunned when she heard this. She couldn't help but smile and squat down. When Yu saw this, she was so happy that her eyes turned into crescents. She stuck out her tongue playfully and pounced on her shoulder. Yun Shusher supported him steadily and stood up. Yu hugged her shoulders in satisfaction. Her little face moved closer to her and she asked in a childish voice, "Mommy, are you tired?" "I'm tired." "When Yu grows up, Yu will carry Mommy." Yun Shusher smiled. Yu is really Mommy's considerate and warm little man. The little guy raised his palm-sized face and asked blankly, "Mommy, what's a little warm guy?" "That's right. He's a very heartwarming boy." Yu will only warm Mommy, not other people. Yu's pink lips curled up sweetly as he cupped her face and planted a big kiss on her lips. The mother and son laughed and bumped their heads together before they left, laughing. A Lincoln limousine was quietly parked by the side of the road. The car had a sleek, dark body. Through the window, there was a childish and cold handsome face. The boy leaned lazily against the leather seat and rested his chin on one hand. He looked to be about 6 years old, and there was a maturity and coldness on his face that didn't match his age. Through the window, he looked expressionlessly at Yun Shusher and Yu teasing each other. Under the fine fringe of his forehead, there was a slight ripple in his cold eyes as they focused. The figures of the couple gradually disappeared into the distance. He didn't know why, but as he looked at the backs of the mother and son, a strange feeling arose in his heart. It was indescribable and inexplicable. Chapter 13. He narrowed his eyes slightly. When he could no longer see the couple, he suddenly lowered his eyes to hide the loneliness that flashed through his eyes. His gaze turned to the notebook on his lap. Looking at the half-completed homework, he turned off his phone in annoyance. A middle-aged man dressed in a suit respectfully opened the back door of the car and handed over the dessert he had bought. "Young master, here's the dessert you wanted." The housekeeper carefully unwrapped the cake and handed it over with a fork. The boy took it indifferently. However, looking at the delicious dessert, his mind vaguely recalled the boy's charming smile when he hugged the toy. He suddenly lost his appetite. "I'm not eating any more." He pushed the dessert aside and said coldly, "Let's go." Uncle Chow looked at him in a daze, then threw the cake into the glove box by the street and got into the car. The car sped away. At night. Moo Group, CEO's office. What entered his eyes was the elegant and luxurious decor. It was stylish and elegant, and it was luxurious to the extreme. The man stood facing the window. His muscular figure was tall and slender. He was 189 meters tall and had an imposing aura. He looked at the bustling night view of the city expressionlessly. His brows were slightly furrowed and his eyes were deep. Mu Wanru slowly opened the door of the CEO's office and saw the figure standing quietly in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. She could not help but smile gently. This man held the highest power in the Mu Group. He was the young master of the Mu Group and the CEO of the Mu Empire. He was also the young master of the Mu family, Mu Yaja. At the same time, he was also her fiancé. Although they had not held their wedding ceremony yet, she was already the young madam of the Mu family. In the future, their wedding would definitely be grand and luxurious. However, such a man was undoubtedly an influential figure among the aristocrats. Many young ladies from prestigious families flocked to him like a flock of ducks. The moment she thought of the scandalous scandal between Mu Yaja and a certain diva in today's newspaper, Mu Wanru's heart went crazy with jealousy. In the eyes of outsiders, she was the future young madam of the Mu Group. Who knew that she and Mu Yaja were husband and wife in name but not in reality? This man was extremely cold to her. This made her extremely embarrassed. Mu Wanru gently placed her handbag on the sofa and quietly walked to his back. Her arms gently wrapped around his strong body, and her face slowly pressed against his broad and powerful back. Shag. Mu Yaja's eyes regained their focus. He calmly turned his face to the side. Under the cold light, his facial features were so exquisite that they looked like the work of the gods. Handsome eyebrows, arrogant jaw, sharp edges and corners, especially those deep and enchanting red phoenix eyes, obsidian-like pupils, breathtaking. This was a handsome and mature man. His handsomeness was not just on the surface. Although his cold face looked very young, his bones exuded the aura of an emperor, arrogant and sharp, completely natural. His every movement was imposing, and he was like an ancient overlord who could dominate everything with a wave of his hand. With this kind of boldness, one could tell at a glance that he was a cold-blooded man who had been through a lot. "Grandpa asked me to ask you, are you going back to the Mu family tomorrow night?" The man's sword-like eyebrows lightly raised, and his lips overflowed with an indifferent voice. "No." Chapter 14. Seeing his cold expression, the woman glanced at the pile of documents on his desk and asked softly, "Xia, am I disturbing you?" Even though she was already his wife, the young mistress of the Mu family, she still maintained a cautious attitude towards this unfathomable man at all times. Although she had grown up with him, she still felt that she had never truly entered his heart. Being engaged to him made her think that she was the happiest woman in the world. She loved this man to the bottom of her heart. The irony was that she had never seen through this man. Even though he was her husband, most of the time, he was as cold to her as he was when they first met. Or perhaps, this man had always been like this. He was domineering, he was arrogant, he was cold and decisive, but she had never seen him show any tenderness to anyone. Except for Ichen. Only in front of Ichen would he restrain his usual sharp and cold aura. Mu Yaja's thin lips curled up slightly, and his cold voice had a hint of gentleness. "No." Mu Wanru smiled faintly. She was overjoyed by his small indulgence, and her eyes revealed deep love. She slowly walked to his front and stretched out her arms enchantingly. She intimately hooked her arms around his shoulders, and her sexy body intimately pressed against his chest. She lowered her eyes and slowly inched closer to his handsome face, kissing his sexy thin lips. Mu Yaja's phoenix eyes were cold. He turned his face away, and her kiss landed on his chin. Mu Wanru's face stiffened. She frowned and looked up, only to see the man's cold gaze. The corner of her mouth could not help but curl up bitterly. She secretly mocked herself in her heart. Yes, how could she forget? Even though they were husband and wife, his lips had always been a forbidden area. No one could touch them. When he was with her, it was like playing a game. It was just a routine, and there was no exception for any other woman. Mu Wanru was very angry. She held Qin Yi's face with both hands aggrievedly, and her eyes became misty. "Sha, do you love me? Answer me seriously. Do you really love me? Or are you just following your grandfather's wishes and treating our marriage as an order?" Even though she had endured it repeatedly, when she saw the scandal between him and another woman in the magazine today, she was still upset and angry. She could not bear to let other women taint the man who had always been like a god in her heart. Mu Yaja's deep face did not have any fluctuation of emotions, and it was as cold as ice. For some reason, the face in front of him was clearly Mu Wanru, but his thoughts were all on the 100 billion development project. Mu Wanru was unwilling to give up and kissed him again. However, he turned his face away without a trace and avoided her, keeping her at a distance of 1,000 miles. Wanru, stop fooling around. Mu Wanru's smile was bitter and her heart was a little desolate. She had known that he would avoid her, and that was why he had never kissed her, or any other woman. Beijing's young Master Mu. Although there were many women flocking to him, in the end, none of them were special. Even for her, she was his legitimate fiancée, and also his closest woman. However, there was no exception. Does he really love me? Or does he only treat me as a lonely solace? Or is it not even a solace? He is not even willing to play along? Chapter 15. She had suspected more than once that if it wasn't for the engagement set by her grandfather, if it wasn't for this marriage based on her grandfather's expectations, this man probably wouldn't even look at her, right? If he loved her, why would he not let her kiss him? He had not even said, "I love you" to her even once. But she loved him. She tolerated, gave in, and tolerated him in an extremely humble manner. He had a noble status and was proud and arrogant. He was the crown prince of the Mu group. Even though she was deeply loved by Grandpa Mu, she was still out of his league. Therefore, she comforted herself more than once that she was the fiancée of the Mu family. She was the future young mistress of the Mu family. Their engagement ceremony was in a few months, so she should not be calculative and should be satisfied. But she was greedy. Not only did she want his body, but she also wanted his heart. Mu Wanru smiled bitterly and said in a low voice, "Do you really want to be with me?" Mu Yaja seemed to be a little absent-minded. That woman's helpless face flashed in front of his eyes. Mu Wanru saw that he was in a daze and could not help but hold his collar tighter. "Sha, did you really love me? Answer me." Mu Yaja pushed her away and returned to the table. His voice was neither cold nor warm. "Wanru, don't be stubborn." He looked down coldly. His indifferent and low voice sounded as if he was coaxing an unreasonable child. But when was she being unreasonable? Mu Wanru was brought back to the Mu family by Grandpa Mu more than 10 years ago. He brought her to him and set the engagement. In the capital, the Mu family was an influential and wealthy family. Mu Wanru was the precious daughter of Grandpa Mu. She was pampered and reserved. She loved him, but he did not love her. This engagement was not essential to him, who was born in a wealthy family. He was just following his grandfather's wishes. According to his temperament, women were not essential. Marriage was just to maintain his grandfather's favor. It was a disguised form of contract. His engagement with Mu Wanru was no exception. It was just a bargaining chip. Now, the side branches of the Mu family were ready to make a move. Many people were coveting his position. He was just using this engagement as a springboard to expand the territory of the Mu Empire. Love. This word was too extravagant for him. What was love? Was it those upper-class ladies who sought fame and fortune and fawned over him? Was it the willful and arrogant Mu Wanru? Was it a young model who wanted to become famous? In this era of material desires, where money and desire intertwined, who would still talk about feelings? He had never loved anyone except for his mother. Family and love, they were all out of reach. He was cold and he closed his world. In the business world, he could do whatever he wanted with a wave of his hand. His style was cold and hard. In private, you could talk about benefits with him, but you could forget about entering his heart. Love. Ridiculous. The phone on the table suddenly rang. Mu Wanru picked it up for him. A voice message came from the secretary's desk. President, young master is here. There were footsteps outside the door. Then the office door was pushed open and a small head popped in. Daddy! The little boy saw that Mu Yaja was not busy, so he walked in. When he realized that Mu Wanru was also there, his face suddenly became unnatural. He called faintly, Mommy! Chapter 16. The little boy was also very sensitive. Other than Mu Yaja, he seemed to be quite distant from everyone else. Usually, he was just like his father. He always had a cold little face and was serious like a little adult. He didn't look like a child his age at all and was extremely mature. When he was 3 or 4 years old, Mu Yaja spent more time with him. He was just like a little devil who loved to play pranks and often teased the maids in the Mu residence. He was the epitome of a hedonistic little ancestor. However, in the past 2 years, Mu Yaja had been very busy with the matters of the Mu group. Without his father by his side, the little boy gradually became quiet and didn't like to talk much. Sometimes, when Mu Wanru looked at this little face, she couldn't help but think of the young Mu Yaja. He was also this cold and indifferent, and no one could get close to him. However, it was only in front of Mu Yaja. After all, he was still a child. He would more or less reveal a child's unique nature. It was rare for him to act coquettishly, and occasionally do a few bad things in an attempt to attract more attention. Mu Yaja also doted on him and indulged him. Therefore, in front of him, Xiao Yichen had always been lawless. Mu Wanru returned to her senses and smiled as she waved at him. Yichen, come here. Xiao Yichen looked at her. After taking a few steps, he suddenly stopped and looked at his father with obvious reluctance. Mu Yaja turned around. When he saw the little boy, the cold expression on his face eased a little. He sat down on the sofa and gently patted his slender legs with his large palms. When Xiao Yichen saw this, his eyes turned into crescents as he ran over to his side. Mu Yaja's lips curled up as he carried the boy and placed him on his lap. Xiao Yichen had the same facial features as him, but his eyes were handsome and gentle, unlike his coldness. Just like that timid girl 6 years ago. The man frowned slightly. Many nights, that beautiful and refined face would appear in his mind. Beneath him, that face that was sometimes shy, sometimes hesitant, and sometimes sullen. That girl was a stunner. He didn't even have time to savor her before she disappeared from his world. 6 years ago, Xiao Yichen was born very weak due to premature labor. When he found out that the other child was not saved, he felt somewhat regretful. He had always thought that his heart was as stiff as ice. It was only because Grandpa Mu loved children that he fulfilled his long-cherished wish and got a young girl as a surrogate mother. However, he didn't expect only to save one child. He had always felt regretful and guilty. Hence, he doted on little Yichen very much. Under his doting, little Yichen grew up healthily, though he was not close to Mu Wanru. The child was innocent by nature, but he was full of intelligence. Mu Wanru also doted on Xiao Yichen when they were at the Mu residence. She even treated him as her own. However, when she was alone with Mu Yichen, she couldn't hide the jealousy and viciousness in her eyes when she looked at the child. She hated herself for not being able to give birth. After all, this child wasn't her biological child. How much could she care about him? Xiao Yichen had been distant from her since they were young. Daddy, I want to play remote control car racing. Remote control car racing? Mu Yaja frowned. You were tired of it in the past. Why do you want to play now? I just want to play. Xiao Yichen pouted. Chapter 17. A rare tenderness appeared in his eyes. Okay, Daddy will buy it for you. Not only will Daddy buy it for me, but you'll also play with me. Xiao Yichen snuggled into his embrace, greedily enjoying the moment of warmth between father and son. Mu Wanru stood quietly at the side, feeling a little dazed. She did not know why, but she suddenly had the misconception that no matter what, she could not interfere in this father-son pair's world. On Friday night, Yun Shishir brought Yu back to the Yun family. Initially, Yun Yecheng was very reluctant to let her and Yu move out of this house, but knowing her situation and difficulties, he asked her to return once a week to have dinner with him. Even though Yun Shishir was a little wary, there was nothing she could do. After all, she owed her father a lot. If he had not brought her out of the orphanage, who knew what kind of situation she would be in? Yun Shishir carried the groceries she had bought and walked at the back. Yu Yu skipped up the stairs and saw Yun Yecheng waiting for him at the corridor. After the company went bankrupt, they sold their previous villa and moved to an apartment building far from the city center. There was no elevator on the 8th floor. Upon seeing his grandfather, Yu Yu happily ran over and threw himself into his arms. The latter was also overjoyed to see his adorable grandson. Even though he was tired from the day's work and his body was a little weak, he still lifted him up high and hugged him in his arms. "Grandpa!" Yu Yu was all smiles. His watery eyes blinked mischievously as he hugged his neck and called out sweetly. "Yu Yu is so obedient." Her father leaned over and kissed his rosy cheeks. "Yu Yu, have you been obedient to mommy recently?" "Yes. Yu Yu is very obedient." Yu Yu's handsome face revealed a sweet smile. Yun Shishir carried her things upstairs. After entering the door, she went into the kitchen and began to prepare dinner. Li Qin was still sleeping while Yun Na had gone out with her friends and would only be back before dinner. Yun Yecheng sat on the sofa with Yu Yu in his arms. Yu Yu gestured excitedly at him. "Grandpa, let me tell you. Mommy bought me a remote-controlled racing car when I went to the mall with her today. I wanted to bring it to Grandpa to play with." As she spoke, she suddenly lowered her head in embarrassment and fiddled with her tiny fingers. "But Yu Yu doesn't know how to play with it. I'm afraid I'll break it. So I didn't dare to open it." When Father Yun heard this, his expression changed slightly, and his large palm gently stroked Yun Che's forehead. Yu Yu had always been very sensible. He would never ask for anything expensive. A toy that cost more than 100 yuan was already considered a luxury item in his eyes. Even so, he still wanted it. He could still remember the last time he was playing with his friends in the small garden. He saw a father and his son fiddling with a remote-controlled racing car. The father and son were driving the car to their heart's content on the grass. He secretly hid in a corner and watched the scene enviously. He thought that if one day his father could play with him, how happy would that be? However, he had never seen his daddy before. His mommy had never mentioned him, either. He vaguely remembered asking his mommy where his daddy was. The moment he asked that question, he saw his mommy's sad expression. From then on, he did not dare to ask again. Chapter 18. Her father scratched the bridge of his nose and teased, "Next time, Grandpa will help you assemble it for fun." Yu Yu's eyes lit up when she heard that. She nodded with a smile. "And here I was wondering who it was. Turns out it's just 2B asterisk stars." The harsh words suddenly destroyed the warm atmosphere. Yun Yecheng's expression changed as he raised his head with an ugly expression. He saw Li Qin, in her pajamas, appear at the entrance of the living room. She crossed her arms and coldly sized up Yu Yu, who was in her embrace. He raged. "What are you talking about? Yu Yu is your grandson." Yu Yu's shoulders shrunk at the sight of her, but she remembered Yun Shishir's warning not to talk back to Li Qin and Yun Na. She pursed her lips and looked up at her with a smile. "Grandma!" Li Qin cast him a sidelong glance and said harshly, "Hey, don't! I don't deserve to acknowledge you as my grandson." Yun Yecheng was furious. "What do you mean by that?" "What else can I mean? I mean it literally. It's your business if you want to acknowledge him, but I'm not. Who dares to acknowledge a B asterisk starred who has a mother but no father?" Li Qin glanced at her coldly and raised her voice. Intentionally or unintentionally, she looked in the direction of the kitchen and said sarcastically, "She gave birth to a child out of wedlock at such a young age. She became a single mother before she even graduated from university. She doesn't even know who the father of her child is. Who knows where this bastard came from? She has a father but no father to acknowledge her, right?" Yun Shishir's face turned pale as she pursed her lips. Li Qin continued harshly, "Besides, the company went bankrupt because of her. Our family hasn't had a good life these few years. Someone doesn't know what's good for her and doesn't know what's good for her. She insisted on bringing back a burden to the Yun family. She's so shameless. She can afford to lose face like this, but I can't. I don't think I can hide my face when I talk about this to others." In the kitchen, Yun Shishir heard the harsh words coming from the living room. Her hands paused for a moment, and her face turned pale. She turned around abruptly and said, "You, stop before you go too far. Li Qin, have you had enough? How could a person's mouth be so poisonous? If it wasn't for Shishir, the Yun family." Father Yun stopped abruptly and didn't continue. He had kept the source of the money Yun Shirshir had given him a secret. After all, it would be bad for Yun Shirshir's reputation if the news of her surrogacy got out. Therefore, Li Qin assumed that the debt was repaid from the Yun family's assets. What? Go on. So what if she's gone? Li Qin flew into a rage out of humiliation. Her eyes turned red as she felt wronged. She was so angry that she laughed. All right, you're going to bully your own family for 2 outsiders, aren't you? Why are you yelling at me? Yun Yeqing. Why did I do that? I'm doing this for the Yun family. When the company went bankrupt, I even borrowed a sum of money from my family. I'm too ashamed to return it now. Haha. Now, you're yelling at me for 2 outsiders? Are you going to chase Nana and me out of the Yun family tomorrow because of them? Yun Yeqing was so angry that his face turned ashen. He could not help but raise his voice. Don't be unreasonable. What are you talking about? Li Qin shouted, How am I being unreasonable? Chapter 19. Li Qin lowered her head and coldly glanced at him. She felt that the young and tender face was an eyesore no matter how she looked at it. Her heart burned with anger. Narrowing her eyes, she raised her hand and slapped his face. Little bastard. You sure know how to pretend to be a good person. Who do you think you are? Get out of my way. It's all your fault. Yu Yu's face was slapped to the side. He slowly lowered his head and touched his cheek with his small hand. His fine fringe covered his eyes, so no one could see the expression on his face. All they could see was that his pink lips were tightly pursed. Yun Shirshir heard the commotion and immediately rushed out of the kitchen. When she saw Yu Yu being slapped, she was furious. She ran over and hugged him sadly. Her eyes were cold and gloomy. Mr. Yun was even more furious when he saw this. He stood up and rushed to Li Qin. He raised his hand to slap her, but someone suddenly grabbed the corner of his shirt tightly. He was stunned and lowered his head. He saw Yu Yu raise his small face. Half of his face was already red and swollen, but he still put on an elegant smile. Grandpa, don't quarrel. Yu Yu learned something in school today. If the family lives in harmony, everything will prosper. Yun Yeqing's hand froze in mid-air. He hesitated for a moment before he lowered it weakly. His eyes were filled with bitterness and complexity. Li Qin was obviously frightened by his anger, but she saw him turn around and pour Yu Yu a glass of water. This child was so sensible. He felt that having a wife like Li Qin was a misfortune for their family. He had once thought of getting a divorce, but this woman just had to cry, throw a tantrum, and threaten to hang herself. She made a scene in the neighborhood. Yun Shirshir carefully looked at the palm print on Yu Yu's face with lingering fear. She raised her head and looked deeply at Li Qin before she stood up and pulled Yu Yu to the kitchen. This dinner, as always, had a different flavor. When Yun Na returned, the atmosphere was even gloomier. Yun Na had never liked Yun Shirshir since she was young. It was no wonder that she was treated like a little princess by Yun Yeqing and Li Qin, who doted on her since she was young. However, one day, another daughter barged into this harmonious family of 3 and snatched away more than half of her father's love. From then on, her father was no longer her father alone. If there was anything good, he would not only think of her in his heart. Anyone would more or less care about this. Yun Shirshir was perfect. She did well in her studies, and she was patient with her. Because she was too good, her father loved her even more. Therefore, Yun Na could not tolerate her existence in Yun Shirshir's eyes. That was why she hated her so much. At that time, Yun Na was in her rebellious phase, and she was jealous and ostracized Yun Shirshir, an outsider, let alone Yu Yu. She didn't even put him in her eyes. In her heart, Yu Yu was a bastard child. She had a father, but no father recognized her. The dinner table was a little quiet. From time to time, Yu Yu would put food in Yun Yeqing's bowl. Yun Shirshir chatted at the side about interesting news in the company, and the atmosphere was somewhat relaxed. Even though Li Qin and Yun Na did not like Yu Yu, they could not be too presumptuous with Yun Yeqing around. After dinner, Yun Yeqing received a call saying that he had to go out for something. He gave Yun Shirshir a few words and left in a hurry. Yun Shirshir did not want to stay any longer. She hurriedly cleared the dishes and planned to leave after washing them. Chapter 20. Yu Yu obediently helped her clean up. His little hands struggled to lift the bowls and followed her into the kitchen to help wash the dishes. He was more or less afraid of Li Qin and Yun Na, so after Yun Yeqing left, He stuck close to Yun Shirshir. In the living room, Yun Na glared hatefully at the mother-son pair in the kitchen and complained to her mother. Mom, why did you let this little bee asterisk start into our house? It's so unlucky to see him like this. I was in a good mood. Li Qin sat on the sofa with a sullen expression. Humph. Who knows? You'll have to ask your father. AB asterisk TCH and AB asterisk starred. Why did our family meet with these two scourges? Nana, don't let your father hear this. Otherwise, he'll help outsiders teach us a lesson again. You didn't see your father like that today. It was so scary. Yun Na turned pale with anger when she heard this. Dad actually helped them? Li Qin got angry when she said this. Isn't that so? Yun Na clenched her fists and snorted coldly. He's just AB asterisk starred. Even his father doesn't want him. I wonder which man she fooled around with. Don't learn from a certain woman in the future. She gave birth to a child out of wedlock at such a young age. If word gets out, it's really embarrassing. Yun Shirshir lowered her head and washed the dishes. Her movements were stiff like a machine. Under the dim yellow light, her face was strangely tense. Those unpleasant words could be heard clearly even though they were separated by the door. She couldn't stand it. The mocking in the living room continued. Yun Shirshir straightened up abruptly, but a fair and tender hand suddenly pressed down on her arm. Yun Shirshir lowered her head in shock and saw Yu Yu leaning on her side. He looked at her with a smile. His pair of lively eyes seemed to see through her complicated thoughts. Mommy, Yu will help you wash. Let's go home early. With that, he stood on his tiptoes and stretched his little hands into the sink with some difficulty. Yun Shirshir was stunned for a moment. She pursed her lips and endured the humiliation again. Many times, she couldn't help but want to explode, but she had to endure it. They could target her, but she could listen, endure, and take it. After all, she knew that she owed the Yun family. If it weren't for Father Yun, she wouldn't have had such good living conditions. He was the one who gave her a home, even though this home didn't welcome her. However, no matter how much they ostracized her, their hearts were made of flesh. Yu had never done anything wrong to them. In the end, he was still an innocent child. He was so young, so he shouldn't have to experience the same darkness as her when she was young. If not for Yu's presence, she would have exploded on the spot. However, with Yu by her side, as a mother, she wanted to leave a beautiful childhood in Yu's heart. She would never step into the Yun family again. On the way back, Yu sat in her arms. Yun Shirshir buried her face in his shoulder weakly and held his hand tightly. For a moment, she felt a little regretful. Back then, she shouldn't have been so selfish to keep Yu by her side. Perhaps, if she had stayed by that man's side and had a father and a mother, she wouldn't have suffered all these grievances. That family must be very rich. In that family, Yu's life must be very happy, right? But she couldn't bear to. After 6 years of relationship, blood was thicker than water. She couldn't bear to part with this cute and sensible child. Chapter 21. Yun Shirshir whispered in his ear, I'm sorry, Yu. Yu opened his mouth, wanting to say something. He actually wanted to ask if his daddy really did not want him anymore. Did he really not like him, so he abandoned him without a care? Was he really like what the adults said, born with a father but not acknowledged by a father? However, he swallowed the words that were at the tip of his tongue. Yu held Yun Shirshir's slender fingers and looked up at the night sky outside the window. He said softly, Mommy, even if Yu's daddy doesn't want you, Yu still has Mommy. Yu loves Mommy. Mommy, don't be sad. It's Daddy's fault for making Mommy sad. Yu must protect Mommy when you grow up. Yun Shirshir looked up and followed his gaze. She let out a long sigh and hugged him tighter. Yu is such a good boy. The Mu residence. In the living room, Mui Chen was sitting on the sofa when he suddenly felt a strange throbbing pain in his heart. It was unbearable. He furrowed his brows slightly and placed his small hand on his chest. His palm touched it, and it was beating very quickly. His heart was in so much pain that he almost suffocated. The helper, who was tidying up his toys, hurriedly squatted in front of him when she saw him clutching his chest in pain. Young master, what's wrong? My heart hurts. Mui Chen broke out in cold sweat. It's like being pricked by a needle. It's unbearable. Is it still the same as before? The helper was at a loss for words. The young master was always like this. He would often have sudden palpitations and chest pains, but he was sent to the hospital several times, and the cause of his illness was not found. Even the authoritative experts couldn't figure out what was going on for a while. Mu Yichen curled up on the sofa and sucked in a breath of cold air. His eyes were cold. What's wrong? He slowly walked down the escalator with the help of his cane. The old man was dressed in a well-ironed tang suit. Although he was old, he still looked energetic. It was not difficult to tell that he was a romantic and elegant person when he was young. Great-grandfather. Mu Yichen looked at him and called out obediently. His position in the Mu family was unshakable. He was someone who had toyed with the rich and powerful all his life. Hence, just a look from him was enough to make others revere him. Therefore, even a rich playboy like Mu Yichen was afraid of Grandpa Mu. Mu Shang, on the other hand, doted on the little guy to the bone. Mu Yaja was his most beloved grandson, and Mu Yichen had Mu Yaja's blood flowing in his veins. Therefore, he naturally doted on him. Seeing that his most beloved great-grandson had relapsed, the old man's face changed. He hurriedly asked, "Are you feeling unwell again? Is your heart hurting again?" Grandpa Mu's expression was full of concern, but Mu Yichen evaded him subtly. It was obvious that he was very afraid of him. He was afraid of his grandfather's stern face and did not like to be close to him. "It's nothing." "Nonsense. Look at you. You're breaking out in cold sweat." The old man's heart ached. "Great-grandfather, I'm going upstairs to read." Mu Yichen jumped down from the sofa and ran upstairs. Looking at his back, the old man sighed slowly. The night was dark. A black Bugatti Veyron sped along the road. The neon lights shone on the streamlined body of the car, and the shadows in the tunnel flickered. Mu Yaja controlled the steering wheel. His deep-set eyes were tinged with a hint of sinister hostility. The bleak moonlight cast a silver glow on his handsome, sculpture-like face. He stepped on the accelerator, and the roar of the engine drowned out all the noise. Chapter 22. Tonight, for some reason, he was a little out of control. No matter how bad his mood was in the past, or how difficult the development project was, he was very patient. However, today, he was inexplicably annoyed and even tired. His phone rang. Mu Yaja picked up the phone. Mu Yichen's voice came from the other end. "Daddy." "Yes? What's wrong?" "Daddy, my heart hurts again. Yesterday, I had a dream. I dreamed of Mommy." The sports car came to an abrupt stop. The car window rolled down, revealing Mu Yaja's gloomy face. "Yes? Mommy? Mu Wanru? Not this Mommy. I dreamed that a beautiful woman gently called a name, but it wasn't my name. Oh, I can't explain it clearly. Anyway, when I dreamed of her, I felt so at ease and warm, just like..." Mu Yichen's childish voice paused for a moment, and he complained, "But I don't like this Mommy. She's not gentle at all. Yichen doesn't like her. Daddy, I don't want this Mommy. I want the Mommy in my dream." The little guy cried and threw a tantrum, acting willfully. Mu Yaja's face darkened, but his voice was unexpectedly gentle. "Be good, Yichen. Don't throw a tantrum, okay? Daddy will come back to accompany you right away." "Okay. Daddy, I'll wait for you." After the call ended, Mu Yaja's smile gradually faded. Could humans really have telepathy? The doctor said that Xiao Yichen was a twin, so there was often telepathy between twins. However, that girl gave birth to 2 boys for him, and one of them was not breathing at birth. After that, he sent people to the hospital to find the doctor and nurse who performed the operation to ask for the whereabouts of the child's body. He wanted to bury the child properly, but everyone claimed that it had already been taken care of. At that time, he deeply regretted it. However, ever since Xiao Yichen could remember, he kept mentioning to him that he dreamed of having a younger brother. The younger brother had delicate features and looked very much like him. It was as if they were standing in front of a mirror. He had always thought that it was nonsense. Until one day, Xiao Yichen had a high fever. The family doctor put him on an 4-drip. While he was unconscious, he kept calling out, "Mommy! Mommy!" He was helpless and attached to her, but he was never as cold as he was to Mu Wanru. Although Xiao Yichen usually called Mu Wanru Mommy, they weren't close. When he woke up, he started crying. Mu Wanru wanted to hug him, but he cried and refused. He kept crying. Ichen has a younger brother. He's sick. Ichen's heart aches so much. However, he had failed to save that child back then, so where did his younger brother come from? No one believed his words. They only treated him as a child. Children's words carried no harm. In the end, Xiao Yichen did not mention it again. However, he was becoming more and more distant from Mu Wanru. The next day was a peaceful working day. However, in the afternoon, an unexpected accident caused Yun Shishir to lose her job. After the lunch break, Yun Shishir was about to hand the business proposal to the department head. Just as she left, a few gangsters dressed like hooligans openly injured the security guards at the company's entrance. They barged into her department, overturned a row of tables, and shouted her name. Chapter 23. When Yun Shishir returned from the minister's office, she was also frightened by the situation in front of her. However, she quickly calmed down. When these arrogant and despotic young men saw her and found out that she was Yun Shishir, they went up to her and dragged her out of the company by the arm. One of them, who looked like the boss, mercilessly raised his hand and slapped her. He looked very angry and shouted at her aggressively, "You're that B*T*''s sister?" Yun Shishir was startled. She held her stinging cheeks as she sized them up. Belatedly, she realized who the B***TCH they were referring to was. "Hey! Do you know how much money your sister owes us?" The man chewed his gum and looked at her up and down. Yun Shishir lowered her eyes and pursed her lips tightly. She did not make a sound, but she quickly understood the ins and outs of the matter. Thinking of Yun Na, she was most likely having a lot of fun outside and owed a lot of debt. Her family didn't have any money at all, so she didn't have any money to pay it back. Since she couldn't pay it back, she remembered her and told these people the address of her company. Yun Shishir was secretly regretting her decision. Back then, she was afraid that her father would not be able to contact her due to some unsatisfactory matters at work, so she left her address to them. She did not expect that someone who should not be here would come knocking on her door. However, she was not willing to compromise with them. It was not that she had a backbone, but she was already poor. If she paid Yun Na's debt, then where would you use tuition fees come from next semester? Seeing that she did not speak, the boss became even angrier. He grabbed her collar and slapped her face a few times. "Are you mute? Can you speak? Say something. Damn it! Are you not going to pay up?" A few hooligans pushed her around, and a few pairs of eyes that were filled with evil intentions glanced at her chest. "It's fine if you don't pay up. You just have to come with us obediently. If you don't have money to pay up, there are always other ways. Speaking of which, you're quite good-looking. Are you interested in having some fun with us?" A few of them smiled maliciously. Yun Shishir's face was green and red. "Please be more respectful when you speak." "Oh! Haha! This little girl has quite a temper." The man smiled sinisterly and then slapped her again. "How can you be so arrogant? You owe money and you don't pay up, and you're still in the right." Yun Shishir slowly turned her face, and her hand secretly reached for the phone in her pocket. This small movement was caught by the men. One of them fiercely grabbed her wrist and slapped her phone on the ground. Of them, he stomped on it and crushed it. She was startled, and panic appeared in her eyes. "You want to call the police? I didn't expect you are." The man spat and pushed her to sit on the ground. He kicked her hard on the shoulder and said, "Call the police. Call the police." "Boss, didn't that be woman has a child? This woman has a son. Which kindergarten does he go to?" One of the men looked at her meaningfully. Yun Shishir suddenly looked up and blurted out, "No! Don't find trouble with you. I'll give you the money." She had always been very rational, but when it came to Yu, she would lose her cool. Chapter 24. When she returned to the office, she hurriedly withdrew her bank card. Her hands were trembling, and her eyes were stinging. After withdrawing a few thousand yuan, she finally paid off Yun Na's debt. The few hooligans counted the money with satisfaction and glared at her fiercely. Finally, they did not cause her any more trouble and swaggered away. When she returned to the company, the department in charge found her and called her into the office. They fired her on the grounds that she had brought a lot of trouble and losses to the company. They told her to pack up and leave quickly. Yoon Shurshur, who stood in the hooligan circle and was unmoved by the threats of so many evil people, was about to lose her job. Her eyes immediately turned red. She did not care about anything else and cried as she begged the manager not to fire her. She still had Yu. She could not lose this job. If he lost this job, where would his living expenses come from during this period of time? The Yoon family was still burdened with a sizable debt. Yu was still young and needed to spend money. Now that the kindergarten fees were ridiculously high, coupled with Yu's weak body, the cost of nutrition was a hefty sum. Coupled with the mother and son's living expenses, there was no way for them to raise money. When the manager saw her pleading, he could not help but be moved. To be honest, Yoon Shurshur was a very outstanding employee. Even though she was the only woman in the network technology department, her skills were not inferior to anyone else. When it came to work, she had always been diligent and conscientious. However, this time, because of her, the higher-ups were very dissatisfied and threatened to fire her. There was nothing he could do. He did not have much power in his hands and could not protect her. Therefore, even though Yoon Shurshur begged bitterly, in the end, it was to no avail. When she got off work, she simply packed up and left the company. When the employees heard that she was leaving, some were happy, while others were worried. Most of them felt that it was better for Yoon Shurshur to leave as soon as possible. She was always in the limelight in the company and stole their promotion opportunities. Her abilities were outstanding, and her looks were outstanding. Even the department head liked her, and she received the most annual bonuses. Now that she was gone, they were much more relaxed. Some of her colleagues had a good relationship with her. When they learned that she had been fired, they felt sorry for her. They exchanged contact information with each other and sent her out of the company. Yoon Shurshur left the company and walked alone on the road in a daze. She hugged her bag and felt depressed. Perhaps it was because she had been too distracted with her head down. She didn't see the red light turn on, nor did she hear the roar of the sports car in the distance. She only heard an ear-piercing screech of brakes, so sharp that it almost pierced her eardrums. Only then did she react, but it was already too late. The speeding sports car brushed past her body and abruptly stopped not far away from her. Before Yoon Shurshur could react, the car suddenly brushed past her and she fell to the ground. In the intense pain, the skin on her knee was scraped. She suddenly came back to her senses. The documents in her arms fluttered to the ground. Yoon Shurshur looked up in shock. In her blurred vision, she saw an extremely luxurious high-end Porsche. The streamlined body of the car showed its nobility everywhere. Yoon Shurshur had seen the introduction of this sports car in a magazine before. It was said that it was a global limited edition and was custom-made. There were only 3 of them in the world. Chapter 25. Yoon Shurshur did not know if it was because of the pain or something else, but her eyes stung and became moist. She could no longer hold back her tears as they slid down her cheeks and dripped onto the ground. She was so upset that she started sobbing softly. She had been a vagrant since she was young. Even though she had a family later on, other than Yoon Yeching, no one in the Yoon family welcomed her. She had always been helpless. Now that she had lost her job, she really did not know what to do. The grievances that had been suppressed in her heart for a long time finally found an outlet. The unforeseen events in the past few days had already exhausted her. Just thinking about how she had just lost her job and was now penniless because of helping Yoon Na pay off her debt, she did not know what to do now. All along, she had been very strong, so strong that she was almost stubborn. Even when she was in a difficult situation, she would only lick her wounds alone. No matter how tough and tiring it was, with Yu by her side, she always felt that life was full of hope. However, reality hit her black and blue all over. Yu had once told her that when she was in trouble, she just had to smile. Even a child knew this principle, but she could not do it well. Hence, she could no longer stop her tears from falling. Yoon Shurshur covered her cheeks in a sorry state. She sat on the ground and sobbed sadly. Not far away, the Porsche's engine stopped. The door opened, and a pair of expensive leather shoes stepped on the ground. Mu Yaja got out of the car gracefully and closed the door behind him. In his line of sight, he saw a woman in a white dress sitting on the ground motionlessly. She buried her face and cried like a pear blossom in the rain. She looked very pitiful. The girl looked very young, about 20 years old, but she looked a little frail. She wore a simple dress. Her soft, black hair was slightly messy from the wind and draped over her shoulders, covering her shoulders. Her attire was not eye-catching, but it did not detract from her beauty at all. Instead, it added a hint of fragile beauty, making her even more pitiful. Mu Yaja's gaze slowly narrowed, deep and distant. He did not know why, but this girl touched his heart slightly. He felt that she was somewhat familiar, as if he had seen her somewhere before. But now that her head was lowered, it was hard to see her face clearly. Mu Yaja's sword-like eyebrows raised slightly. He walked closer to her and elegantly squatted down in front of her. His phoenix eyes lowered slightly as he coldly glanced at the injury on her knee. On her fair and slender legs, there was a smear of scarlet blood. The dark red blood flowed down along the beautiful curves of her legs. He lowered his eyes and looked at her body again. He didn't see any other injuries. Looking at her, she didn't seem to be injured at all. Fortunately, the injury wasn't serious. It was just a scratch. But seeing her crying so sadly, as if she had suffered a great grievance, he didn't know what she was crying for. Now that it was in such a miserable state, it looked a bit like an abandoned cat. Mu Yaja saw it, but his expression did not change. His originally gloomy mood became even more gloomy. He always had the habit of racing on the mountain roads when he was in a bad mood. Just now, he didn't notice the figure on the road. Or maybe it was because she looked too thin and was wearing a white dress. She looked so weak that she could be blown away by the wind. Hence, he didn't notice her at all. It was only when he got close to her that he braked. Luckily, nothing happened. Chapter 26. Seeing her silently crying, Mu Yaja did not intend to waste any more time. He lowered his head and took out his wallet. He took out a few large bills and handed them over expressionlessly. To him, any problem that could be solved with money was not a problem at all. He just wanted to deal with this accident cleanly. Yun Shirshir looked up slightly. His fingers were long and slender, with distinct joints. His nails were neatly trimmed, and he wore a diamond ring on his ring finger. One look and she could tell that this person was of noble status. But when she saw the money in his hand, she could not help but be slightly stunned. She actually forgot to cry for a moment. Seeing that she did not make a sound, Mu Yaja thought that she was not satisfied with the amount. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "Not enough?" It was not that he had never seen greedy people, so he naturally thought that this girl was not interested in the amount he had given her. Without waiting for her response, he lowered his eyes again and took out a few more bills from his wallet. He did not have the habit of carrying too much cash with him, so there were only about $2,000 in his wallet. But it was more than enough to bandage her wound. Yun Shirshir was stunned. She was obviously surprised by his actions. But in the man's eyes, there was obviously a different meaning. This woman seemed to be more greedy than he had imagined. Mu Yaja smiled coldly. His thin lips curved into a mocking smile. He simply took out all the cash in his wallet. He did not care if she wanted it or not. He did not want to waste time with her. Seeing that she did not have any pockets, he folded the money into a roll, leaned closer to her and stuffed the money in front of her chest. His cold fingertips brushed against her skin. His ambiguous action startled her. She raised her head slightly, and through the fringe covering her eyelids, she caught sight of the man's sinister smile with a deep meaning. The handsome man in front of her was 9 meters tall and had a godlike face. His exquisite silhouette was like that of a statue of a god. His facial features were handsome, and his pair of deep phoenix eyes faintly contained the majestic aura of an emperor. At first glance, one could tell that this man must have experienced a lot of bloodshed and was a superior who controlled life and death. Even though it was a smile, it was so cold that it did not have any warmth. It was as if it was just a physical attraction. Looking at her, there was only pity in his eyes. Pity? Why was he looking at her with pity? For a moment, the grievance and anger in her heart poured out and tainted her eyes. The next moment, she saw the man take out a pen and write a string of numbers on her chest in a flamboyant manner. If it's not enough, call this number again. His aggressive behavior caused Yun Shirshir to exclaim in surprise. This action of his was unintentionally humiliating her. "Sir, what do you mean? Are you rich?" Her eyes were filled with anger, and her tone was indignant. "You injured someone, but you didn't even apologize. Do you think that everything can be settled with money?" Yun Shirshir was not an unreasonable person. She also knew that it was her fault. She did not pay attention to the road conditions, But he used such a condescending attitude to stuff the money into her chest like it was charity. This made her angry. Therefore, she only gave him a cold glare and didn't say anything else. After all, summer insects could not be compared to ice. Yoon Shirshir looked up and took out all the money in front of her chest. Her other hand pulled over his broad palm and slapped the money into his hand. Chapter 27. The moment Yoon Shirshir raised her head, that pair of misty eyes looked straight at him. The cold smile on Mu Yaja's lips suddenly froze. His pupils shrunk slightly and then he narrowed his eyes deeply. This stubborn face made his mind startled. For a moment, his thoughts flew away. She did not look at his expression. The back of her hand carelessly wiped away the tears at the corner of her eyes. She stubbornly said, "This mister, it's my fault. I didn't look when I was walking. You don't have to put on such a high and mighty attitude to give alms to me. I don't need it." After saying that, she did not care about him. As if he did not exist, she bent down and picked up all the documents on the ground. She did not even turn her head back as she walked away. Mu Yaja looked at her disappearing figure. He was a little dazed and could not take back his gaze for a long time. That stubborn look and expression suddenly pulled his thoughts 1,000 miles away. His memories suddenly came back. He vaguely remembered that night. The blindfolded girl under him was forced to bear all of his. He still remembered when he fiercely entered her delicate body. That tight feeling was so suffocating. He wantonly took possession of her. Looking at her crying miserably under his body, he liked to see her cry like this. She was clearly such a weak girl. She was as fragile as a bubble that would burst with a touch. In front of him, she showed such a stubborn face. She carefully protected her pitiful dignity. Men really pitied this kind of girl. No matter how cold a man was, there would always be a soft spot in his heart. Although he was proud and aloof, he was no exception. She was different from other women. She was inexperienced. Her tender appearance was unbelievably immature. She was like an unripe fruit that was extremely sour when he took a bite. But it was this kind of immature girl who unexpectedly aroused the desire that he had suppressed for a long time. He wanted her. His tense body kept clamoring. Later on, the so-called formulaic was not so pure. He wanted to completely occupy her. He wanted to be entangled with her until the last moment. Thinking about it later, it was simply a little strange. When had he, Mu Yaja, been bewitched by a woman to the point where he was unable to control his own consciousness and was at her mercy? On top of her, his body was actually out of his control. He had always been a man with excellent self-control. After that day, he forced himself not to see that girl again. His intuition told him that she was a dangerous existence. Since he was young, the blood of an overlord flowed in his veins, and he had always been unruly. He was like a free and unrestrained wind, and he had always been overbearing and controlling others, and no one could restrain him. He did not like the feeling of losing control, whether it was with a woman or anything else. He subconsciously resisted this kind of restraint. However, his body was actually somewhat infatuated with this feeling. Mu Yaja smirked and turned around. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of a document on the ground. He slowly walked forward and picked up the document. It was the ID card that she had left behind. In her panic, she didn't notice that her identification card had fallen to the ground. Mu Yaja could not help smiling as he took out his phone. "Alan, check on someone for me." "Yes, President. The name is..." On the ID card, there was a girl's shy and warm smile. Her watery eyes were bright and sparkling, as if they were filled with sunshine. The brightness in her eyes seemed to have stunned all of time. Chapter 28. At this time, classes were about to end at the kindergarten. She had originally planned to pick up Yu to eat his favorite crab roe soup dumplings. Thus, she asked Yu to wait for her at the school after school ended. However, Yoon Shirshir did not want to pick up Yu in such a disheveled state. Thus, she hurriedly hailed a cab home, changed into a clean set of clothes, and tidied up. Thus, when she arrived at the kindergarten, most of the children in the class had already left. Only Yu was left sitting alone at the entrance with his little backpack. From afar, the little guy had his head lowered. He seemed to be holding something in his hand and was looking at it in a daze. Yoon Shirshir suppressed the loneliness in her heart. She patted her cheeks and smiled as she walked towards him. "Yu." Yu raised his head. When he saw that it was her, a bright smile immediately appeared on his face. He jumped down from his seat and happily ran towards her. He opened his arms and jumped in front of her, acting cute. Mommy! Hug! Mommy! Hug Yu! Yun Shusher lowered her body slightly, and the little guy threw himself into her arms, acting coquettishly in her arms like a ball of cotton. His milky white little face rubbed against her neck intimately. He pouted his little mouth and said with a little grievance, Mommy, why are you only here now? Yu waited for so long. I'm sorry, Yu. Mommy had some matters to attend to at the company, so I was delayed. Okay. Then Yu forgives Mommy. The little guy raised his little head. His charming eyes curved gently. His bright eyes seemed to be filled with fragments of sunshine. Yu smiled faintly before pursing his lips pitifully. Patting his tummy with his little hand, he grumbled, Mommy, I can't take it anymore. Yu is starving. Mommy said that I would take Yu to eat soup dumplings today. When are we going? Yun Shusher's expression changed slightly when she heard this. She was in a difficult position. All the savings in his bank card had already been used to pay off the debt of that disappointing Yun Na. When she resigned today, the manager paid her this month's salary and performance bonus. However, it would only be transferred to her bank account tomorrow. Right now, she was really embarrassed. Crab dumplings were Yu's favorite food, but they were too expensive. She would only bring him there on special occasions or when she received a bonus. Yun Shusher felt a little bitter in her heart. She looked up at Yu and gently caressed his soft cheeks as she coaxed, Yu, let's eat at home today, okay? As soon as she finished speaking, the smile on Yu's face suddenly froze. He lowered his eyes in disappointment and pouted his little mouth. His brows furrowed slightly as he muttered softly, Mommy said that I can't go back on my words. He tightly clenched the piece of paper in his hand, his small white face flushed red from sadness. His teeth bit down on his lips, and his fine and thick black eyelashes were stained with a bit of watery moisture. His eyes brimming with tears. When Yun Shusher saw that the little guy was so aggrieved that he was crying, she immediately panicked. She hurriedly wiped away his tears and said sadly, Yu, don't cry. Mommy will definitely do what I promised you. Yu gently turned his face away. He seemed to be a little angry. After hesitating for a while, Yun Shusher gritted her teeth. In the end, she decided to tell him about her losing her job. She didn't want to leave a bad impression in his heart that she didn't keep her word. Chapter 29. I'm sorry, Yu. Mommy lost her job today, so. Upon hearing this, Yu looked at her in surprise. His eyes widened as he asked, Why? Did Mommy do something wrong? Yun Shusher shook her head and stroked his fringe. No. Mommy will look for a job tomorrow. Mommy is so capable. I'm sure she'll be able to find a job with a higher salary. Then, I'll take you to eat soup dumplings every day. Okay. Yu lowered his eyes and nodded obediently. While Yun Shusher wasn't paying attention, he hid the letter behind his back so that she wouldn't see it. He looked up and smiled as he said, Mommy, let's go home. Yun Shusher obviously didn't notice his little movements, so she didn't know what he was hiding. It wasn't until a few nights later. After dinner, Yu obediently cleared the dishes. He moved a small stool from the kitchen and washed the dishes clumsily. His tender little hands were washed with warm water, and he was especially serious. He knew how to share some of the housework with Yun Shusher since he was young. He was so considerate that he didn't seem like a 6-year-old child. Yun Shusher rummaged through her cupboards and found an obsolete old cell phone. She inserted the SIM card into the phone and turned it on. Only then did she realize that Yu's homeroom teacher had called her a few times. She called back. The homeroom teacher received her call and asked her about the kindergarten's spring outing to the wildlife park. Yu hadn't signed up for the outing a few days after the letter was distributed. Hence, the homeroom teacher called to ask his parents if they wanted to go. Yun Shusher was slightly taken aback. Obviously, she didn't know about this. Hence, she quietly rummaged through Yu's small school bag behind his back and took out a neatly folded list. On the other end of the call, the homeroom teacher sounded a little cautious. She was afraid that she would say something inappropriate. With all due respect, Yu must really want to go on a spring outing with the children. Moreover, the fee isn't much. Does your family have any financial difficulties? Yoon Shusha hurriedly said. No. I'll pay the fee tomorrow. She hung up the call with a complicated expression. Looking at the form, she picked up the pen and signed her name on it. Dishing Financial Group. When Mu Wanru walked into the president's office, she saw that Mu Yaja was not there. His assistant, Alan, was putting a thick stack of files on the table. When he saw Mu Wanru, he immediately bowed his head and greeted her with a smile. Mrs. President. Okay, Mu Wanru replied. She looked around and asked, Where is Chairman Mu? He replied respectfully, Oh, the CEO is not in the office. Where did he go? Mu Corporation and Yayuan Group have an investment proposal in the afternoon. I don't know when he will be back. I see. Mu Wanru nodded. Her gaze then stopped on the thick stack of files on the table. She walked over and picked it up. She raised her head and waved it at him. What is this? Alan was stunned. After a moment of hesitation, he replied, This is the information that the CEO asked me to investigate yesterday. Information? I should be able to see it, right? Mu Wanru asked tentatively. Chapter 30. Aaron did not answer and just kept his head down. Mu Wanru ignored him too. She was the CEO's wife and the young mistress of the Mu family. What was there that she could not look through her husband's belongings? Thus, she removed the seal and carefully took it out. Aaron was Mu Yaja's right-hand man, so he was reliable in his work, let alone investigating a mere commoner. Within a day, he had thoroughly investigated the information and sent it to the office. He did not expect to be caught red-handed by Mu Wanru. As a subordinate, he naturally could not say anything in front of Mu Wanru, so he did not stop her. The information was indeed very comprehensive. It was a thick stack with pictures and text. Mu Wanru flipped through it page by page. From the detailed family background, the school she graduated from, and even her work history, everything was listed clearly. She was initially a little surprised. This was obviously an ordinary girl, so she did not know why he wanted to investigate her. However, the more she read, the more she felt that something was amiss. Yoon Shusha. She had a vague impression of this name, but she could not remember it clearly. It was only when she browsed to one of the pages that her expression changed abruptly. This was actually the girl who had been her surrogate 6 years ago. It was no wonder that she found this name familiar. 6 years ago, she was engaged to Mu Yaja, but she was found to be infertile. This girl was personally selected by Grandpa Mu. Mu Wanru was slightly puzzled and even uneasy. She did not understand why Mu Yaja wanted to investigate this girl. According to the information, this Yoon Shusha actually had a 6-year-old son named Yoon Tianyu. Yoon Tianyu. 6 years old. The same age as Yi Chen. Mu Wanru slowly narrowed her eyes. She vaguely remembered that the surrogate girl was pregnant with identical twins. However, because they were born prematurely and the twins' nutrients were taken away by the older brother in the mother's womb, the younger brother stopped breathing when he was born and was pronounced dead. She suddenly had an ominous feeling. She hurriedly flipped through a few pages and found Yoon Tianyu's information. She read it word by word seriously. When she reached the end, her palms grew colder and at the same time, anger rose in her heart. There was also a stack of photos in the file. She hurriedly took out all the photos and flipped through them one by one. The first few photos were of a beautiful boy, and the background was in a kindergarten. She had always investigated from the kindergarten. His delicate features and handsome silhouette were exactly the same as Xiao Yichen's. This instantly confirmed her guess. Her fingertips suddenly tightened, and the photos in her hands. Mu Wanru bit her lip hard. Could it be that the child did not die? Or could it be that this child had been hidden by that woman for the past 6 years? Mu Wanru's heart started to panic as waves of chills ran through her body. What exactly was this woman's intention? That child clearly did not die, so why did she not mention it? Could it be that she wanted to use this child's custody to extort a large sum of money from the Mu Group? Perhaps, her ambition was not limited to this. Perhaps she wanted to use this child to make other plans for the Mu Group? After all, in terms of blood, she was the real mother of these 2 children. As for her, although she was now the young mistress of the Mu family and the wife of the CEO of the Mu Group, she had no blood ties with these 2 children. Chapter 31. Since ancient times, a mother's status depended on her son. It was the same for wealthy families. Mu Wanru's face gradually turned pale, and her fingertips trembled slightly. Alan, who was standing by the side, saw that her face was a little strange. He cautiously asked, "Mrs. President, what's wrong?" "Nothing." She pretended to be calm as she replied. However, when she flipped to another photo, her gaze suddenly froze, as if she had pierced a hole in the photo. In the photo, the young girl was wearing a bachelor's gown, standing at the entrance of the university, revealing a bright and gentle smile. Mu Wanru was stunned. She obviously couldn't believe it and flipped to another photo. There weren't many photos of Yun Shirshir, only a few. However, this face left an indelible impression in Mu Wanru's heart. It's her? Impossible. It can't be so coincidental. Mu Wanru could no longer hide the panic on her face. She put the photo aside and took the information about Yun Shirshir in her hands again. Previously, she didn't pay much attention to it, so she skimmed through it quickly. However, now she read through it word by word. Until her gaze stopped at the words, Welfare Institute, she was so shocked that she paused. Her heart suddenly felt uneasy. Mu Wanru opened and closed her mouth slowly. Her eyes were glued to the document, but she was unable to utter a coherent sentence. Alan saw her in a daze and glanced at the information. He mistakenly thought that she didn't understand, so he explained it to her. Yun Shirshir. Her biological parents are unknown. Her background is unknown. When she was 6 years old, she was sent to the Welfare Institute. When she was 8 years old, she was adopted by the Yun family. This year, she is 23 years old. She graduated from St. Roland Women's University. She is also the girl who was a surrogate for you 6 years ago. Welfare Institute. Mu Wanru looked at the black and white words on the white paper. While she was in a daze, her memories flew back to the day when she first met her. 15 years ago. Shungda Welfare Institute. At that time, Mu Wanru was just an orphan waiting to be adopted. Because of her likable face, she was well liked in the orphanage and was revered as a princess. Many children were willing to play with her. However, the children in the orphanage were different from the children outside. Although they seemed to be getting along well on the surface, they were secretly competing with each other. Every day, people would come to the orphanage to adopt children. Those who looked better or were more obedient would have a chance to be adopted. However, the young Mu Wanru had an unyielding ambition since she was young. Her mother was a masseuse at a bar. She had a low status and abandoned her at the entrance of the hospital after giving birth to her. She was picked up by a poor couple and lived in poverty for several years. It was only after a car accident that she became an orphan again and was sent to the orphanage. From that day on, she told herself that she wanted to live a good life and be adopted by a rich person. One day, a 7-year-old girl arrived. She heard that her mother had passed away, so she was sent here. Although this girl was dirty from head to toe, her appearance was very delicate and beautiful. Mu Wanru saw that the girl had a jade pendant on her. It looked expensive, so she took advantage of the fact that the girl was asleep and took the jade pendant for herself. When the girl woke up and found that the jade pendant was gone, she cried and made a fuss. However, Mu Wanru was very prestigious among the children at that time. No one believed that she had stolen the jade pendant. No one believed the girl's words. Chapter 32. Until one day, an elderly man who looked like a rich man came to the orphanage and summoned her. The elderly man took out a token from his pocket. It was exactly the same as the jade pendant. When they were pieced together, they were a perfect match. She did not know anything about it and only lied that the jade pendant was left to her by her mother. The elderly man believed her and brought her back to the Mu residence. He named her Mu Wanru and quickly set up a marriage contract between her and Mu Yaja, who was only 14 years old at the time. In the office, when she regained her senses, Mu Wanru fell on the sofa in a daze. She held her forehead with one hand and her back was drenched in cold sweat. She clutched the thick stack of documents tightly in her hand. Her fingertips could not help but tremble as she panicked. She really could not guess why Mu Yaja ordered people to investigate this information. Could it be that he sensed something was wrong and began to suspect her identity? He began to suspect her real identity when she was brought back by Grandpa Mu. When Mu Wanru thought of this possibility, her heart could not help but skip a beat. In fact, she stole the jade pendant from Yun Shirshir. She grew up in the orphanage. Because of her sweet and obedient appearance, she was well liked by everyone and had always been held in a high position. At that time, She was still young and had not seen anything good. Hence, when she saw the beautiful jade pendant on that girl, her heart was filled with greed and she stole it. After that, Xiao Shi found out and confronted her. However, which child in the orphanage did not side with her? Because of this, because of her framing, Xiao Shi was severely reprimanded by the director and punished with a paddle. It was so painful that she cried for several nights. However, she did not expect that this jade pendant would be involved in a complicated history. 15 years ago, by a freak combination of factors, she was brought back to the Mu residence by the Mu Group's chairman, who was also the head of the Mu family, Mu Shang. However, Grandpa Mu refused to talk about the origin of the jade pendant. He only told her that it was a relic left behind by her mother. After returning to the Mu family, the jade pendant was taken away by old Master Mu. It was paired with the other half of the jade pendant and was kept on him. She often saw him looking at the jade pendant in a daze, as if he was thinking of someone. When she grew up, the old man would occasionally mention that woman to her. Only then did she realize that the woman was his adopted daughter when he was middle-aged. However, that was all he said about that woman. It was as if he was deliberately hiding something from her and did not mention anything else. After that, she became the eldest daughter of the Mu family. She grew up being doted on until she got engaged to his grandson, Mu Yaja. From the beginning until the end, she didn't mention a single word about the true origins of this jade pendant, and she intentionally concealed it. She knew that if she were to confess everything, it would mean that she would lose everything she had. She would lose her position as the young mistress of the Mu family. She would lose Mu Yaja. She was not reconciled. She was unwilling to let go, and she did not intend to return everything to the original owner. She admitted that this was a little selfish and unfair to that girl, but she did not regret it. Now that she had everything, her greed had made her lose herself. Chapter 33. When she first entered the Mu family, she felt a little guilty and apprehensive. After all of this did not belong to her but to that girl called Xiao Shi. However, happiness came so suddenly that everything in front of her seemed to be nothing more than a dream. It was as if everything was just a dream the moment she opened her eyes. However, when she opened her eyes again, she was still in that princess-like room and lying on that big, soft bed. Mu Sheng sat beside her. His stern face could not hide his loving expression. He was so gentle toward her and indulged in her to the core. Whatever she wanted, he would satisfy it one by one. Mu Wanru lacked parental love since she was young. She had never lived in such affluence, so she was immersed in this sudden happiness. However, the one who made her so selfish that she wanted to own everything was that man. The Muse were the capital's rich and powerful family, and Mu Yaja was a man that many rich ladies flocked to. He was so outstanding that it was unimaginable. Why did God dote on him so much that he was so extravagant that he was not stingy with giving him so much? His family's wealth could rival a country's, his godlike appearance, his noble and arrogant status, and his stunning talent and gifts. Every single one of these would make one's eyes red with envy, and he had them all. She started to be greedy and obsessed with this man, so much so that she lost herself. God had never mistreated her. Although she was the Mu family's young mistress and the CEO's wife, she had snatched them from others. With a single thought, her life turned upside down. She actually became the CEO's wife of this huge business empire. At first, she was still uneasy, but later, she gradually felt at ease and enjoyed everything that did not belong to her. However, fate seemed to love to play tricks on people. Ironically, she was born infertile. Although Mu Shang used many of his connections in the medical field, it could not be cured. What was more ironic was that the surrogate he had hired was actually her, the real owner of this jade pendant. Mu Wanru was already drenched in cold sweat as she felt a sense of crisis. After so many years, they finally met again. 9 years ago, she snatched away her jade pendant and took everything that belonged to her. 9 years later, she became a surrogate and gave birth to a child that belonged to both of them. Somehow, there seemed to be an invisible bond that bound Mu Yaja and her together. This made Mu Wanru feel uneasy. Could it be that he had already started to suspect her identity, that she wasn't the real owner of this jade pendant, and then secretly ordered people to investigate? Impossible. For the past few years, she had been hiding it very well. In fact, when she was an adult, he was also suspicious of her. Back then, he was in too much of a hurry. When he saw that she was carrying the jade pendant, He didn't even do an identity check. However, as she grew up, her appearance gradually became more beautiful and delicate. In the end, her eyebrows did not resemble that woman's, which aroused his suspicions. Chapter 34. She believed that she had not given herself away in the past few years. Besides, with the evidence of the DNA test, there was nothing suspicious about her. Mu Wanru immediately denied this conjecture, but the stone hanging high in her heart did not fall. Could it be because of that child? Did Mu Yaja find out that the child did not die prematurely and was secretly hidden by that woman? Did he suspect that she had ulterior motives toward the Mu family, so he investigated her background? It must be because of this. Mu Wanru raised her head abruptly and looked at him with feigned calmness. She coldly said, "Don't mention to anyone that I've seen this information, okay? Just pretend that you didn't see anything." Aaron was slightly taken aback. He clearly did not know the purpose of her warning. He saw her take away the information about Yun Shusher's welfare home from more than a decade ago and the results of the investigation on Yun Tianyu. Without raising her head, she coldly said, "Don't mention anything about this child to the CEO, including this woman's past. Also, don't mention this woman's background in the welfare home to the CEO, okay?" He raised his eyebrows in a daze. Seeing that he did not answer, Mu Wanru's tone turned even colder. "Did you hear me or not?" Aaron lowered his eyebrows and did not answer. His superior was Mu Yaja. Although Mu Wanru was the wife of the CEO of the Mu Group, she was also the HR manager. He did not have to listen to her orders. He had the responsibility to let the CEO have a look at what he had investigated. Mu Wanru seemed to have read his mind, though. She snorted and sneered. "Why? Do you think that you can disobey me just because you're the CEO's subordinate? Do you think that I can't control you just because I'm the HR manager?" She sneered and stood up. She approached him and sized him up. Facing her piercing gaze, Alan lowered his head and looked down. However, he heard her say word by word, "Even if I don't have much power in the Mu Group, I think I have the ability to drive you into a corner." Alan raised his eyes in shock and looked at her in surprise. "Keep your mouth shut about this matter. Do you understand?" She ordered again. He was silent for a long time before he slowly sucked in a breath of cold air and nodded with some difficulty. "I understand." When Mu Yaja returned, Mu Wanru had already left with a guilty conscience. She had to think of a way to stop the situation from developing before Mu Yaja thoroughly investigated the matter. Mu Yaja was her man. She couldn't give any other woman a chance. Although Alan was Mu Yaja's loyal subordinate, he was also well aware of Mu Wanru's position in the Mu residence. With Grandpa Mu's favor, he didn't dare to offend her easily. Therefore, when Mu Yaja returned to the office and saw the little information on the table, his suspicious gaze fell on Alan. Under his urgent gaze, Alan said calmly, "CEO, Yun Shusher is indeed the surrogate 6 years ago." Ha! Mu Yaja's eyes turned cold. He suddenly asked slowly, "Is there anything suspicious about her?" "No, CEO." Alan recalled Mu Wanru's warning. He lowered his head and looked indifferent. "Get out." Chapter 35. Losing her ID card was like adding fuel to the fire for Yun Shusher, who was in a difficult situation and was in a hurry to find a job. The next day after losing her ID card, she went to apply for a new one. However, the police were too lazy. They kept delaying it and didn't take her seriously at all. They came up with all kinds of perfunctory excuses. Her temporary ID card was not reissued after more than 2 weeks. She was so angry at the police station that she almost exploded. She tried to interview with a few companies, but they all rejected her because she didn't have any documents. Although she didn't mention this to Father Yun somehow found out that she had been fired from the company. He didn't know the reason, but he didn't say anything and just gave her a sum of living expenses. Her good friend, Xiao Shui, who had just returned to China, found out about this and generously lent her a sum of money to help her get through her current predicament. Xiao Shui was her best friend in high school. They were close to each other and were as close as sisters. At that time, the rumor that Yun Shusher was pregnant and had a child was all over the school. Everyone suspected that she was being supported by the boss. Only Xiao Shui defended her without hesitation. They had originally agreed to study abroad together, but Yun Shusher didn't go because of family reasons. Xiao Shui hated her to death at that time and ignored her for a while. In the end, The misunderstanding was resolved. Now that Xiao Shui had returned to China, Yun Shishir brought Yu Yu to welcome her back. The moment they met, Xiao Shui's eyes were brimming with tears as she pulled her into her arms and hugged her tightly. After 3 years of separation, Yun Shishir couldn't help but tear up and feel emotional. Just as Xiao Shui was about to complain about her missing the appointment, she caught sight of Yu Yu standing beside her from the corner of her eye. In an instant, Xiao Shui's eyes widened to the size of copper bells. She blinked in a daze for a long time, shocked by this cute baby. Although she had seen a lot of the world, she was still stunned by Yu Yu's handsome and young face. Especially those clear eyes. The corners of those eyes were curved, and the smile was warm and gentle. It almost melted Xiao Shui's heart. Ah! Oh my god! This little guy is too cute. Xiao Shui squatted down and held Yu Yu's fair cheeks. She couldn't wait to rub them into her arms and kiss them. She asked Yun Shishir. Shishir, is he your brother? She smiled and then explained. No, I'm not. Let me introduce him. He's Yun Tianyu, my son. After a pause, she said to Yu Yu, Yu Yu, this is the Auntie Xiao that Mommy mentioned to you before. The expression on Xiao Shui's face froze in an instant. What? What did you say? Yu Yu smiled gently and replied on behalf of Yun Shishir. Aunt Xiao, how are you? She's my mommy, and I'm Yun Tianyu. Auntie can call me Yu Yu. Son? Mommy? Are you kidding me? Xiao Shui was dumbfounded. Comparing the two, the little lad's soft pink lips were indeed the same as Yun Shishir's. She always thought that Yun Shishir's pregnancy was just a rumor. She didn't expect it to be true. For a moment, she didn't know how to digest it. That's not right, though. This child looks to be 6 or 7 years old. Calculating the time, he was born before the new year, which was a year before she went abroad. Chapter 36. Xiao Shui nodded and brought her to a Western restaurant that she used to love the most. They entered a private room. After ordering, Xiao Shui hurriedly dragged her into the washroom and questioned her. Yun Shishir did not want to hide the truth from her, but she did not want to delve into the past, so she only gave a brief explanation. Xiao Shui's heart ached when she heard this. That stepmother of yours actually treated you like that. She's simply heartless. I found it strange. Back then, Father also mentioned that the Yun family's fate was at stake 6 years ago. They owed a lot of debts, but they were cleared in a year. I didn't expect you to sacrifice so much. Why? Yun Shishir smiled lightly. I know how to repay kindness, don't I? Besides, it's all in the past. Since it's for the Yun family, then it can be considered as me repaying Father for raising me. The difficult time in the welfare home, where she was bullied, was a nightmare in Yun Shishir's heart. If Yun Yeqing had not adopted her, she would not have been able to bear the humiliation at that time. Even after that, Yun Yeqing's fatherly love for her did not diminish. Moreover, the time after giving birth to Yu Yu was difficult. Thinking about it now, it was as unbearable as an abyss of suffering. Now that this matter was mentioned, she did not feel any pain or itch. To have such a heartwarming son like Yu Yu was a gift from the heavens. She was already grateful. 6 long years. No matter how deep the memory was, it would fade away. Then, Xiao Shui was afraid that she would be sensitive and carefully asked, Aren't you afraid that Yu Yu will be snatched away by his biological father? Yun Shishir's eyes blurred for a moment as she recalled that man. She then said, That's why I want to keep Yu Yu's background a secret. No one will mention it, and no one will be able to snatch Yu Yu away. She did not know who Yu Yu's father was, nor was she interested in knowing. It had nothing to do with her. Yu Yu was her most cherished treasure. She would not allow anyone to snatch him away. Even if it was his biological father, he still couldn't do it. Seeing that she didn't seem to want to talk about it, Xiao Shui didn't pursue the matter any further. A look of envy appeared on her face. That's great. To have such a charming son. When she returned to the private room, she couldn't help but pounce on Yu Yu. She pinched his little cheeks and said, Yu Yu, you're so cute when you smile. As she spoke, she put on her standard coaxing expression. Yu Yu, come with Auntie, okay? Auntie will take care of you, bring you to eat good food and have fun. Yu Yu put down the teacup in her hand and elegantly wiped her fingers with a wet towel. Then she revealed a charming smile and said, Auntie, Mommy told me not to go with strangers. I'll be abducted and sold. Xiao Shui was stunned. During the dinner, Xiao Shui suddenly asked her, "Shusher, you're so beautiful. Have you ever thought of going to Huanyu Entertainment?" Huanyu Entertainment. Yun Shusher raised her eyebrows in surprise. However, Xiao Shui glared at her with a look of disdain. Huanyu Entertainment is preparing to shoot a movie recently. They're holding a nationwide audition for the female lead. You can give it a try. After all, acting used to be your dream. Yun Shusher smiled slowly. She was a university student majoring in arts and media. She watched helplessly as she stepped into the entertainment industry. It was just a step away. However, she gave up on this dream because her family's fortunes had declined. Chapter 37. Don't tell me you don't know about Huanyu Entertainment. Huanyu Entertainment is backed by Dishing Financial Group. It's one of the top 100 business empires in Asia and the world. At the mention of Dishing Financial Group, Xiao Shui's eyes shone with yearning. Dishing Financial Group's position can be said to be the core hegemon of the financial industry. Just think about it. In the face of the financial crisis, so many big companies have collapsed, but Dishing Financial Group is standing tall and unaffected. Moreover, the CEO of Dishing Financial Group is a legendary figure. He's young, has a prominent family background, and is as rich as a country. So many socialites flock to him. With such a strong backer like Dishing, Huanyu Entertainment is like a leader in the entertainment industry. At the mention of Dishing's CEO, whom she had seen on TV, Xiao Shui immediately started talking. In front of Yun Shusher, she could not wait to gossip about his 18 generations of ancestors. However, Yun Shusher was not interested in this and interrupted her helplessly. Why are you talking about it as if it's a god? Is it that exaggerated? I say, you've seen too little of the world, haven't you? Everyone in the capital knows about Dishing Financial Group's prominent position. You don't know who the mayor is, but how can you not know about Dishing? Xiao Shui said mysteriously, I heard that even the important government officials of the country have to give Dishing some face. Xiao Shui paused, and then a look of admiration appeared on her face. To be honest, from what I know, this Dishing CEO's net worth is immeasurable. No one can say for sure whether his net worth is in the tens or hundreds of billions. This man of the hour is very mysterious in front of the media. He's too mysterious. You've gone off topic, haven't you? Yun Shusher sipped her coffee coolly. Xiao Shui looked helpless. Shusher, don't tell me you've really given up on your dream back then. Acting was indeed my dream. Yun Shusher looked away helplessly. But, back then, there was a drama that had come to school to audition for the female lead. Her mentor had recommended her to be the female lead. It was such a good opportunity, but she had not taken it. Back then, that movie had become popular all over the country. Everyone in the cast had become famous. Xiao Shui said, Huanyu Entertainment has always valued talents. As long as you have talent, you will be valued. Say. As for me, I originally wanted to give it a try because of that illustrious CEO. Unfortunately, my external conditions aren't good enough. I can be a small model, but if thrown into the talented Huanyu Entertainment, I'll definitely be a beggar. However, Yun Shusher, instead of applying to some small companies, why not give it a try? You're very talented, and you're so talented. Don't let your talent be buried. I believe you can do it. Xiao Shui's confident encouragement left Yun Shusher in a daze for a long time. Huanyu Entertainment. Dishing Financial Group? For some reason, her eyelids twitched violently at the mention of these words. Currently, the youthful pain movie, The Green Apple, which was sponsored by Huanyu International Pictures, was conducting a nationwide audition for the female lead. It was said that the cast for this movie was quite impressive. Not only had his original novel dominated the list of youth novels for 3 consecutive years, but he was also known as the originator of sadomasochism in youth novels. Chapter 38. The director of this movie was Lin Fengtian, who had won the Best Director award at the Golden Badge Awards, and the male lead had already been confirmed to be the superstar Gu Xingze. The superstar's huge fan base alone was enough to support half of the box office sales. If she could snatch the female lead role, she would definitely become an instant hit. Lin Fengtian had won the Best Director award at the International Film Festival. Any female star who was groomed by him had a bright future ahead of them. Many celebrities would do anything to be in his movies. That night, Yun Na also brought up this matter. At the dining table, She suddenly put down her bowl and chopsticks and looked at Yoon Yeching seriously. Dad, I want to discuss something with you. I hope you can agree to it. Yoon Yeching coldly glanced at her. What is it? I want to participate in an interview with Hwanyu Entertainment. Yoon Yeching did not understand and was confused. What interview? Oh my. Dad, don't you know? Hwanyu Entertainment has invested in a movie based on a famous novel. The male lead has been confirmed to be Gu Xingze. The director is now conducting nationwide auditions for the female lead. Yoon Na paused for a moment. She suddenly raised her chin proudly and her eyes shone with confidence. Dad, don't you think that I'm suitable to be the female lead? I'm confident that I can pass the audition. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If I pass the audition, I can become a star. When I become famous, you and Mom will be able to live a good life too. After I get paid, I can bring you guys on a vacation, live in a good house, and drive a good car. As Yoon Na spoke, she glanced disdainfully at Yoon Shirshir from the corner of her eye. Yoon Shirshir only lowered her head to eat. No one knew what she was thinking. Yoon Yeching could not help but frown when he heard this. Can't you find a stable job to think about all these things all the time? Dad, I have the capital to be a star. Why should I find those ordinary jobs? Yoon Na did not know whether to laugh or cry as she refuted. Yoon Yeching sighed and shook his head. He said meaningfully, Dad suffered from being uncultured back then. You should settle down while you're still young. Go to an adult university and find a stable job. Don't do these crooked things all the time. Dad, why are you so stubborn? What do you mean by dishonest practices? Being a celebrity is very profitable. Just filming a movie can earn you hundreds of thousands. It's no longer the era where you can live a good life just by studying well. Yoon Na was annoyed by his old-fashioned way of thinking. Yoon Yeching only focused on picking up the food and did not say a word. Yoon Na said patiently, Dad, don't you think the place we live in is very poor? Broken house, broken fridge, broken TV. Don't you want a bigger house? Seeing his silence, she could not help but fantasize about it. If I become a celebrity, I'll be able to make a lot of money just by shooting a movie. At that time, I'll have the money to buy you a big and magnificent villa to live in. I'll let you and Mom enjoy life at home. His words made Li Qin beam with joy. Her heart was as sweet as honey. She said happily, My daughter is so obedient. Mom is very happy to hear that. She then turned to Yoon Yeching and said, Yeching, look at how sensible your daughter is. Humph. She's not like someone who's not sensible at all. Yoon Shirshir acted as if she did not hear the hidden meaning behind her words. Yoon Yeching frowned again. Being a celebrity. Don't mess things up for me. I heard that industry is very messy. Chapter 39. Yoon Na persuaded again. Dad, others say that the world is a mess. There are bad people everywhere and everywhere is a mess. Actually, as long as you are firm, you won't have to be afraid of going astray. Li Qin also said, Yeching, what our daughter said makes sense. It's rare for her to be filial and want to earn money to show filial piety to us. Shouldn't we support our daughter's idea? A woman like Li Qin, who was greedy for wealth and splendor, had spent all her energy on Yoon Na. She was eagerly waiting for Yoon Na to climb up the social ladder and make a name for herself in a wealthy family. Although Yoon Na was different, they were still mother and daughter. Obviously, they were jackals of the same tribe. Hypocritical and vain, they were only willing to share the joys but not the hardships. She usually paid attention to the entertainment headlines. When she saw those star-studded actresses walking on the red carpet of the International Film Festival, she was amazed. She often saw those actresses who married into rich families and became phoenixes in the headlines. She was very jealous. In her heart, those who could step into this rich and vain circle would be able to climb up the social ladder. Yoon Yeching lamented again and again. That's enough. If you like it, then go ahead. You're not a child anymore. Since you have your own plans, then go ahead and give it a try. Don't blame me for not reminding you though. That circle is no doubt a tiger's den for a child like you who has no social experience. Dad is old and powerless, so I can't protect you. When the time comes, don't blame me for being useless. Late at night. When you climbed into bed to sleep, Yoon Shirshir sat in front of the computer and searched for job postings online. She originally wanted to enroll in finance in university, but she accidentally entered the art department. She was quite talented in the art field, and with her unique looks, she was not inferior even when compared to A-list celebrities. Out of curiosity, she clicked on Hwanyu Entertainment's official website. What entered her eyes was a luxurious web page. The news of the national audition for the female lead of The Green Apple dominated the headlines. The investment for this movie was huge. If she could get the opportunity to play the female lead, she would definitely become famous overnight and have a magnanimous career path in the entertainment industry. Having a magnanimous career path meant that she would be able to earn a lot. It was not that Yoon Shirshir was not tempted. She looked at the notice board and saw that Hwanyu was looking for an artist assistant. She made up her mind. A few days later, she got her ID card. Early in the morning, she sent Yu to kindergarten and took a taxi to Hwanyu Entertainment with her prepared resume. Early in the morning light was faintly discernible, and the air was filled with a faint fragrance of grass. When they arrived at Hwanyu Company, they saw a long queue at the entrance. Yoon Shirshir was a little shocked by this scene. She had never seen such a shocking scene before. She was secretly surprised. Could it be that there were so many competitors applying for the assistant position? After asking around, she found out that she had bumped into the first audition for the female lead of The Green Apple. Other than the girls who had rushed over to participate in the audition with dreams of becoming stars, there were also many die-hard fans of Gu Xingze. The male lead had been confirmed for him, and the director had decided to use a new actress for the female lead. The film crew started the nationwide audition. The promotional video for the audition filmed at Tsinghua University had already been broadcasted and caused a sensation. Even if the movie did not have a lot of resources, Gu Xingze's popularity alone was enough to attract many students to apply. Chapter 40. Although the audition was held on a weekend, many of his die-hard fans came when they heard that the popular superstar Gu Xingze would be attending the audition. Some of them were even loyal fans who had flown in from other places. The popularity of the audition caught the production crew off guard. Even though they hired bodyguards to maintain order, they still couldn't stop the army of aggressive fans. The huge Hwanyu Tower was suddenly filled with people. Banners of support were hung all over the tree trunks and walls outside the company building. The entire Hwanyu Entertainment seemed to have been crushed by Gu Xingze's army of fans. At the grand entrance of Hwanyu Entertainment, there were several luxurious cars parked. In one of the nanny vans, 3 men in simple clothes were looking at the bustling crowd at the school gate. Most of them were young and pretty female students. They were all in a hurry to attend the audition. All of them were dressed to the nines in order to maximize the director's attention during the audition. Director Lin. I don't mean to say this, but these female students are pretty good-looking. Look at the one in the white dress. She's quite stylish. Doesn't she look like Yin Xiaochuan in the original novel? And the one in the black dress over there. I think this young lady is well prepared. She must have read the original novel. In the novel, Yin Xiaochuan wore a black dress like this when she first appeared on the school stage. That young lady looks pretty good, but I feel that she's not tall enough. The assistant leaned against the window and looked in the direction of the school gate. He was like a small steward in ancient times who held the selection for the emperor. He talked endlessly and gestured with his hands. He turned around to look at the man in the white shirt, but saw that he only had his head lowered and was flipping through the application forms. He glanced at the 2-inch colored photos, but he didn't seem to be interested. Boring, Lin Fengtian suddenly said and threw the name list aside. He was too lazy to look at it again. Director Lin? What's wrong? Lin Fengtian lowered his head and sucked on a cigarette. His tone was neither cold nor warm. There's no one I want. What? The assistant was shocked and tongue-tied. Lin Fengtian was one of the top youth-oriented filmmakers in the country. The films he directed had always been a money-making magnet for youth-oriented films. One of his representative works, I Heard That Love Came Back, was a classic that could compete with Hollywood blockbusters. The reason why he had so many classic films was because of his fanaticism and strictness towards his work. In today's entertainment circle, movies were no longer purely an art form. Out of commercial considerations, many directors had gradually deviated from the main theme of movies. However, Lin Fengtian was different. Everyone knows how critical he is when it comes to the art of film, especially when it comes to casting. Long ago, He had bought the adaptation rights of the original novel with a large sum of money. He was extremely obsessed with the plot of the novel. The Green Apple tells the story of an unforgettable forbidden love. The female lead, Eun Seo-chun, and the male lead, Eun Dong-yu, were siblings of the same father and mother. They grew up together and gradually developed feelings for each other that shouldn't exist between siblings. The love and hate entanglement along the way. The relationship between the two of them was the most heart-wrenching. Chapter 41. Lin Fengtian chose Gu Xingze not only because of his soaring popularity, but also because his melancholy aura was a perfect match for Eun Dong-yu's. The role of Eun Seo-chun was the most difficult to portray. Eun Seo-chun was a kind and innocent girl. She was immature, cute, and playful. She had been carefully protected by Eun Dong-yu since she was a child. Hence, she had an otherworldly innocence. This temperament was especially difficult to portray. Even a veteran actor who had been on the stage for a long time might not be able to portray such a character. Lin Fengtian was a little depressed. Although the people on the roster were good-looking, they were not the Eun Seo-chun in his heart. Just as Lin Fengtian was having a headache, his assistant, who was leaning against the window, suddenly exclaimed, "Director Lin, look. That girl in the snow-white dress over there looks like Eun Seo-chun." He looked in the direction his assistant was pointing and could not help but be shocked. His body immediately leaned forward excitedly. In the morning light and warm breeze, a charming and petite figure stood quietly at the gate. This was a girl so beautiful that she looked like she had walked out of a mural. She immediately attracted the attention of everyone in the car. Wow! The assistant was so shocked that he held his breath. He had never seen such a youthful girl before. The girl looked young and even a little immature. She was wearing a clean long dress, revealing her snow-white and delicate arms, shoulders, and neck. She was delicate and flawless. She was pure and beautiful, lovely and moving. Even though she was dressed in such a simple manner, she had an extremely seductive beauty. She was so beautiful that she looked like an otherworldly woman, making one's heart flutter involuntarily. She did not have a sexy figure like other women. She was thin and not voluptuous. She was so tender that it seemed like water could be squeezed out of her. Even so, she still blocked everyone's sight. For some reason, although she was wearing an ordinary dress, she stood out among the bustling crowd of well-dressed girls at the gate. Lin Fengtian's handsome eyes narrowed. There was actually such a beautiful woman in the secular world? He felt a surge of excitement and could not help but pick up the binoculars beside him. The girl stood at the school gate, holding a small handbag in her hand. Her black brocade hair was quietly draped over her shoulders, emitting a moving luster under the moonlight. Under her soft bangs was a beautiful face. Her skin was as flawless as white jade, and her delicate and charming oval face had a faint blush on her cheeks. She lowered her head and lowered her eyes. The corners of her eyes were long and curved, making her look extremely charming. She had a row of long and curly eyelashes that were as thick and long as a comb. They were like fine black feathers or fluttering butterfly wings. They were excessively charming. Those pink lips were like fresh flower petals, tender and lovely. Eun Seo-chun was thinking about something with her head lowered. Her brows were slightly furrowed, but she suddenly had a strange sixth sense, as if something was staring at her from somewhere else. As if realizing that everyone in the nanny van was sizing her up, she suddenly regained her senses. She slowly turned around and looked up at them. At that moment, Lin Fengtian's gaze deepened and he was stunned for a moment. His pair of eyes that had a clear distinction between black and white were watery like an ancient well that reflected the silent moon, and it was suffused with a beautiful moonlight that was tranquil and shimmering, yet bottomless. Chapter 42. When their eyes met, the girl was at a loss. She clutched the bag in her hand tightly, bit her lip, and shuffled her feet slightly. However, it was precisely this unpretentious expression that made people feel that she was rather cute. Eun Seo-chun. Lin Fengtian suddenly slapped the table and exclaimed. This girl was practically a living Eun Seo-chun. Lin Fengtian excitedly reached out to flip through the roster that had been thrown aside. He said excitedly, "Is this girl from this university? Did she sign up? Find out what her name is. Inform her directly to come for the audition." Director. Lin Fengtian looked up and saw the confused look in his assistant's eyes. "We can just get out of the car and invite the girl to the audition. That way, we won't have to waste any effort." He sighed helplessly. Wasn't this director too excited? Lin Fengtian slapped his forehead and said, "That's right. Why didn't I think of that? Why would we need to waste any effort?" He got out of the car immediately. However, when he looked in the direction where the girl had stopped, he realized that she was gone. Gone? Wasn't she standing here just now? Lin Fengtian frowned. His eyes searched the crowd repeatedly, but he could not find any trace of her. She was gone. The audition for an artist assistant was very simple. She just had to fill in a form and submit a few certificates before she could officially start her job. The manager informed her that she could start her job the next day. The salary and benefits were also quite generous. Although it was a thankless job and she might even be bullied, Yun Shirshir was extremely excited. However, when she was about to leave, the manager looked at her strangely and asked, "You have outstanding looks. Why are you here to audition for an artist assistant? What a pity." If this girl was carefully groomed, she would definitely be able to make a name for herself in the entertainment industry. Yun Shirshir smiled but did not say anything. Before she left, she received an information sheet. The artist she was in charge of was actually a newcomer with a big background. Her name was Han Jingyi. The reason why she was a big name was because she heard that this artist had a very strong background and relied on a powerful person to get to where she was today. She also heard that she had gotten a big role. Under Li Qin's expectant gaze, Yun Na returned home with a gloomy face. Li Qin immediately went up to her and was about to ask about the audition when she saw Yun Na's dejected look. Her heart could not help but turn cold. What happened? Seeing her daughter's defeated expression, Li Qin became anxious. Did you fail the audition? Or, did the director not take a fancy to you? Yun Na's face was filled with unwillingness. With my talent, how could I not pass the audition? Even if I can't be chosen as the female lead in this movie, there will still be a director who will take a fancy to me. Then what's with your expression? When Li Qin saw that Yun Na was stuttering, she became even more anxious. Under her repeated questioning, Yun Na finally revealed the truth. Originally, she had been very confident about this audition. Her costume and makeup were all in place. For this audition, she had even crammed the original novel for a few days and had already memorized her lines. She had chosen the most tear-jerking scene in the script and repeatedly practiced it in front of the mirror. She thought that she had portrayed the character well. However, when she rushed to the audition with full confidence, she was told that if she did not have an audition letter, she would not be able to participate in the audition. Chapter 43. Why was she blocked by the words, "no audition letter," when it came to Yun Na? According to the person in charge of the production team, there were too many people who came to participate in the audition. Among them were many of Gu Xing's die-hard fans. Hence, before Yun Na could even step into the audition venue, she was blocked at the entrance. She could only watch helplessly as those people with audition letters walked in. If she was directly rejected in the audition, she would have been willing to lose. However, even though she was full of confidence, she did not even have a chance. She failed just like that. Yun Na's heart was naturally unbalanced. Li Qin had no idea what was going on, so she was confused. Then, what's with the audition invitation letter? Can you get it? How do you get it? Yun Na sighed. I've asked. We have to rely on connections. After a pause, she added, although this audition is an open audition for the female lead, there are still some requirements. Those audition letters are either sent out by people in the production team or by other big agencies who rely on their connections to get them. When many agencies heard that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, they did not hesitate to rely on their connections. Hence, most of the people who were able to participate in the audition were the 18th tier models of the agencies. They all wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to make a name for themselves. Just like Gu Jingyi, the audition water was very deep. Is there no chance? Li Qin could not bear the shock. She had put so much effort and expectations into her daughter, just waiting for the day when she could make a name for herself. Now, was this dream going to be shattered? Yun Na suddenly thought of someone, and her eyes lit up. Don't worry, I have an idea. At night, Yun Shirshir was writing the contact list for Yu Yu's homeschool when her phone rang. She picked up the phone absent-mindedly. On the other end of the line, there was a lot of noise. It seemed to be in a place like a nightclub, and there was a lot of noise. Hello? Hello? Yun Shirshir raised her eyebrows in confusion. No one answered the phone for a long time. She was about to hang up when a man's rough voice came from the other end. Are you Yun Na's sister? Yes. That person said, she's dead drunk now. I can't wake her up no matter what. Can you come and pick her up? Yun Na again. Why was he always causing trouble? Yun Shirshir subconsciously wanted to refuse. She didn't want to clean up her mess anymore. She had treated her and Yu like that, and in the end, she had indirectly caused her to lose her job. What else did she want? She was drunk, so what did it have to do with her? However, Yun Shirshir's weathered face suddenly appeared in her mind. She couldn't help but clench her fists and stare blankly for a long time. Seeing that she did not reply, the person on the other end repeated hello for a long time. She let out a long sigh and asked, "Where are you?" Gabriel. Gabriel's was a famous nightclub in Beijing, and it was famous for its extravagant spending. Therefore, most of the people who came to Gabriel's for entertainment were rich and young masters, but there were also some hooligans who came here to have fun. Therefore, Gabriel's was also famous for being messy. Drugs, gambling, shady dealings, and transactions. Once night fell, this place would become a dark treasury. There were often news of people exchanging gunfire here, and there were heavy casualties. However, even though it was so chaotic and serious about social security, Gabriel's was different from other nightclubs. It had a very powerful background, and the people above it were very influential. Therefore, many people didn't dare to touch it. Chapter 44. As soon as Yun Shirshir stepped into this foul place, she was choked by the smell of smoke. Along the way, the unrestrained looks of men and women entered her eyes. The air was filled with the smell of debauchery, and the private room was a scene of drunkenness. Under the guidance of the waiter, she walked into the private room that the man mentioned. Just as she entered, Yun Shirshir smelled a strong smell of alcohol and smoke. The private room was filled with smoke, and the music was very loud. A few young men with the most popular hairstyles were drinking heartily. He looked around and saw Yun Na lying on the sofa in a drunken stupor, unconscious. When the few youths saw her, they all raised their heads and whistled loudly. Yo! She's really here. This chick is quite pretty. Her figure is not bad either. She looks much more attractive than those young ladies. Someone else chimed in. That's right. It's rare to see such a pure and innocent girl nowadays. I wonder what it's like to be in bed. It must be wonderful. The filthy words were unbearable to the ears. When Yun Shirshir heard those hooligan words, her heart trembled slightly. With a bang, the waiter behind her respectfully closed the door. She stood there awkwardly, unable to move her feet. To be honest, after that incident, she was extremely afraid of these hooligans and wanted to turn around and leave. A young man with a green dragon tattoo on his arm stood up and stepped over the table. He strode forward and grabbed her wrist. He smiled maliciously. You just arrived and you want to leave already? What about your sister? Yun Shirshir looked back hesitantly and glanced at Yun Na. She braced herself and said, I'll take her away. I'll leave now. You're leaving now? The young man grinned and frowned. Don't. How disappointing. Come and drink with us. The young man put his hand on her shoulder and introduced the men on the sofa to her one by one. Come, let me introduce you. This is the boss of our bar street, Brother Chong. The ones sitting next to him are Brother Leopard and Brother Hu. Yun Shirshir couldn't stand it anymore. She broke free from his grip and said, I didn't come here to drink. I'm here to bring Yun Na back. When the young man heard this, he sneered. You don't drink? All right then, let's do something else. His drooling gaze swept across her chest, and he reached out to touch her face. Yun Shirshir dodged in a panic. She was obviously frightened by his aggressive actions. She frowned and said coldly, What are you doing? What are you doing? Of course it's you. The young man tilted his head and said half-jokingly. Behind him, a man with a scar on his face shouted, What's that name? Yun Shirshir, right? Don't just stand there like a fool. Come and sit down. Get the waiter to open a few more bottles of whiskey. Yun Shirshir shook her head and glanced hesitantly at Yun Na. I don't drink. I'm leaving. With that, she turned around and wanted to leave. The young man quickly grabbed her wrist and pulled hard, pulling her back. Yun Shirshir exclaimed and struggled, but how could she resist the young man's wrist strength? He glanced at her from head to toe and said disappointedly, Hey, don't be like this, okay? This little sister is young and doesn't know anything. As her elder sister, don't you know the rules? Yun Shirshir frowned. What do you mean? Chapter 45. The young man laughed, and someone behind him mocked loudly. Your sister doesn't know her place. She came to us to ask for drugs to play with when she has no money on her. She's been clinging to us every day. She owes us $200,000. $200,000. Yun Shirshir was stunned. She felt her head buzzing, and her eyes widened in disbelief. She thought that Yun Na was just being rebellious, which was why she often fooled around outside. However, she didn't think too much about it. She thought that she was just a hooligan and that she would learn to behave sooner or later. However, she didn't expect her to be so fierce that she even dared to play with drugs. She even owed these people $200,000. $200,000. Even if she sold her father's apartment, she might not be able to repay this debt. She was stunned on the spot, and her body was as stiff as a rock. The young man beside her muttered, playing with drugs when you have no money. How boring. Tell me, how are we going to get this money? Do we have to go and get it from you personally? The person called Brother Chong had a cigarette in his mouth. He was having fun with a sexy woman in his arms. He put out the cigarette and said with a smile, the younger sister can't afford it, but the older sister should have money, right? Yun Shirshir's eyes dimmed. I don't have money. She couldn't even afford $20,000 or $2,000, let alone $200,000. The young man glared at her in disappointment. No money? Brother Chong, this woman said she has no money. $200,000 isn't a small sum. Brother Chong heard this and smiled obscenely. You don't have money? If you don't have money, you can pay me back with other things. The young man immediately understood. He lowered his head and looked at her lecherously. He was very satisfied with her delicate face. Look at how pretty you are. Playing with Brother Chong for a few days will be enough to make up for it. Young lady, you should be happy. If it were those women outside, we would really look down on them. No. Yun Shirshir refused immediately. The young man was so angry that he laughed. He patted her cheek gently and pointed at Brother Chong. Hey, don't be ungrateful. Do you know who this is? He's the boss of a bar street in the capital. How dare you refuse him? You're courting death. He practically forced her onto the sofa. Chong-gu hugged her and pulled her over. He poured a glass of whiskey with one hand, wiped the white powder on the rim of the glass with his fingertips, and handed the glass to her. The wine splattered all over the table. Drink this wine. Yun Shirshir looked at the swaying wine in the cup, and her breathing gradually quickened. I don't know how to drink. Not to mention whiskey, she couldn't even touch beer. Her body was allergic to alcohol, and she would get drunk with one sip. Not to mention a glass, even a sip would make her unable to leave this place. Brother Chong clicked his tongue and frowned. What? Are you not going to give me face? I really can't drink. Yun Shirshir clenched her fists tightly. She didn't know what to do. You refuse a toast only to drink a forfeit. When Brother Chong saw that she wasn't going to budge, he raised his head and gave the young man beside him a look. The latter understood. He stepped forward and clasped her jaw, forcing her to open her mouth. He forced the glass of whiskey into her mouth. Large mouthfuls of whiskey rushed into her nose and throat, accompanied by a strong smell of alcohol. At that moment, she felt suffocated and was caught unprepared. She choked a few times, and the burning alcohol slid down her throat. It was so strong that her face immediately turned red, and it was so spicy that tears flowed out. She didn't know where she got the strength, but Yun Shirshir pushed the young man away. The wine glass fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. Chapter 46. With an unknown strength, Yun Shirshir pushed the young man away, and the wine glass fell to the ground and shattered into pieces. She clutched her throat desperately, bent over, and coughed non-stop. After vomiting a few times, she felt a burning sensation in her stomach, as if a raging fire was burning. Pure whiskey, full of strength, with plenty of aftertaste. She had only drunk half a glass, and in the blink of an eye, she felt a little dizzy. She was dizzy, and the world was upside down. Her head was so dizzy that she could barely tell the direction, and her consciousness was gradually fading. Yun Shirshir wanted to stand up, but her body was swaying left and right. Her whole body was weak, and her limbs were numb. Just as she stood up, she fell back onto the sofa. Immediately after, there was a burning sensation in her lower abdomen, as if the fire in her body was burning more vigorously. Yun Shirshir held onto the table, sweating profusely. No wonder she got drunk so quickly and so fiercely. There was something else in the glass besides alcohol. Brother Chong grinned, revealing his dark yellow teeth. He smiled and sighed. This passion-hunting powder is really good stuff. Hee. This is a must. How can something that I got be bad? The young man smiled maliciously, then looked at Yun Shirshir's pained expression, and his heart itched. Brother Chong, if you're tired of this girl, can you let us play with her for a few days? This woman really has a face that brings disaster. Hee. You like her? Brother Chong smiled. Sure, when I'm tired of her, I'll give this woman to you. The few of them nodded and smiled respectfully. Thank you, Brother Chong. Brother Chong, I've already reserved a private room for you. Hee, the presidential suite. On the sofa, Yun Na opened her eyes and sat up. Where did the drunkenness come from? Her eyes were clear and bright. She glanced at Yun Shirshir, who had already lost her mind, and her lips curled into a sneer. Brother Chong, are you satisfied now? How is she? I didn't lie to you, did I? Look, is she worth what I owe you? Yun Na sat over and said with a sweet smile, This sister of mine is very pure. Unlike those seductive women who sat on the stage, their bodies were also very clean. If it was placed in the night market, it could be sold for at least tens of thousands of yuan per night. Brother Chong, you've profited. Yes. It was indeed worth the price. Forget about the money. It was worth more than a few 100,000, it was worth millions. Brother Chong laughed and hugged Yun Shirshir. Obviously, he was very satisfied with her. All right then. Thank you, Brother Chong. As Yun Na spoke, she thought of something and said humbly, Brother Chong, don't tell anyone about me. Don't let her know that I'm behind this. Otherwise, my dad will kill me. I know, he said impatiently. Yun Na giggled and said, Don't be anxious. This person is yours for the whole night. There's no need to rush. You see, about the selection of the female lead. I'm a man of my word. Enough. Get lost. Don't disturb me. Brother Chong's mind was now full of Yun Shirshir, so he did not have the time to care about her. He nodded without thinking much. A few of his subordinates had already opened the door for him. He half-hugged Yun Shirshir and left the private room. Suddenly, a strong wind blew outside the window. The wind rattled the windows. Yu woke up from a nightmare. She sat up in bed and looked to the side. Mommy was gone. Mommy? Chapter 47. At the 6-star Crown Hotel. The presidential suite was decorated luxuriously. It was stylish, elegant, and luxurious. At the table, Mu Yaja looked at the ugly faces of the hypocritical politeness with an expressionless face. He could not help but feel annoyed. Unknowingly, half of the drinks had passed, and the sky outside the window was already dark. Mu Yaja felt inexplicably tired, but more than that, he was annoyed by these people. He finished the vodka in one gulp and stood up. Seeing this, the others looked at each other and stood up as well. He was the main character at the table tonight. Now that he was leaving, it meant that the banquet was over. As the young master and CEO of Dishing Financial Group, he had a distinguished status and held the highest power in the Mu Group. In the face of the global financial crisis, the life and death of these small companies were all in the hands of the Mu Group. The life and death of these small enterprises depended on one word from him. Therefore, they naturally flattered this future owner of the Mu Group and served him with great care. One of them asked in a low voice, Chairman Mu, are you leaving? That person handed over his suit respectfully. Mu Yaja glanced at him, took it, and put it on. Then, someone respectfully opened the door of the suite. He strode out calmly and elegantly. Behind him, a group of men in suits bowed their heads and followed closely. It was like a star surrounded by stars. The VIP elevator door opened, and Mu Yaja walked in confidently. The moment the door closed slowly, he glanced in one direction and his eyes suddenly turned cold. Li Dongqiang had just triumphantly walked out of the elevator with his arm around the delirious Yun Shirshir when he felt a bone-piercing chill down his spine. He raised his eyebrows and looked back. He saw the VIP elevator door that had just closed. At that moment, he vaguely saw a pair of sharp and frightening eyes through the gap of the door. However, he did not take it to heart and did not think too much about it. He hugged Yun Shirshir and lifted her up. He played with the keycard in his fingers and walked toward the suite. Behind him, the elevator door slowly opened again. Brother Chong swiped his card and kicked the door open. Just now, before he closed the door, his hand impatiently reached for his belt. He swiftly unfastened it and pulled down the zipper of his pants. He smiled impatiently and gently patted Yun Shirshir's cheek with his palm. Then, he hooked his leg and closed the door, thinking that the big bed would be his world from now on. That *tch Yun Na really didn't lie to her. In the past, he had heard her say that she had a pure and beautiful older sister, but he had always scoffed at it and disapproved of it. In his eyes, women were all the same. There was no difference. At most they were just tools. But now that she saw it, she didn't expect it to be even more outstanding than what she had described. Different from those common rouge powders, it had a unique charm. It wasn't that he hadn't seen anyone more beautiful than Yun Shirshir, but her elegant temperament was different. Li Dongqiang threw her on the bed harshly. Her beautiful body sank slightly into the soft big bed. Under the dim wall lamp and on the white bed, her black spaghetti strap dress, which complemented her fair and tender skin, added a bit of flirtatious beauty. Her messy black hair was draped over her shoulders, and the scenery in front of her chest was faintly discernible. The beauty that came into view was really enough to make one's blood boil. Chapter 48. Yun Shirshir regained some consciousness. She felt her stomach turn upside down and curled up in discomfort. Her small hands struggled to tear off the clothes on her body. The unfamiliar heat in her body made her want to immediately remove all the covers on her body. She completely lost her reason and the ability to think. She didn't know where she was. She only felt that she was in an abyss of suffering. Her lower abdomen was hot and dry, and her body felt an inexplicable chill. Half of it was a world of ice and snow, and the other half was a raging fire. It was like ice and fire at the same time. This kind of painful feeling made people go crazy. So hot, save me, save me. Brother Chong looked at her and felt proud. Hunting passion powder was the most terrible drug in the black market. Without special channels, it was impossible to get such a good thing. Once she took even a little bit of it, even a chaste woman with strong willpower would not be able to resist it. Without a man, the feeling was simply worse than death. Not to mention this inexperienced woman. Yun Shirshir turned slightly on the bed, and the pain was unbearable. But she didn't know that this action made her even more charming. Changgu quickly took off his clothes. He didn't even care that his pants were only half off before he excitedly climbed onto the bed. He couldn't wait to pounce on her. Little beauty, don't move. I'll help you. I'll let you feel comfortable later. Hee hee. At this moment, the doorbell rang. Brother Chong paused and his expression became distorted, but he didn't want to stop. Now that he was in the mood, what could be more depressing than being disturbed in the middle of it? He simply didn't want to care about the person outside the door and just wanted to continue this beautiful thing. However, just as his hand unbuttoned her clothes, the doorbell rang again. It was pressed urgently and seemed to be a little impatient. In this area of the capital, as long as he was in the circle, he would keep his word. Damn. Now, which blind fellow came to ruin his good mood? What a disappointment. Brother Chong's eyes instantly became unusually fierce. He turned his head abruptly and spat hatefully. He quickly put on his pants and went to open the door with his arms bared. As he cursed, he opened the door. When he raised his head, he saw two men in black standing tall at the door. Their strong bodies blocked the door, almost blocking all the light in the corridor. Li Dongqiang's originally ashen face suddenly sank, and his eyes revealed more or less a hint of fear. Even though he was part of the underworld and had seen a lot of things, he was still intimidated by the aura of these two men. Their auras were too terrifying, and their eyes were filled with murderous intent. They were like bloodthirsty killers in the dark night, cold and merciless. He swallowed hard and looked at them warily. You. What do you want to do? You've got the wrong person. The two men didn't say anything. They reached out and pulled him out from behind the door. Each of them grabbed one of his arms and lifted him up like he was a prisoner. Brother Chong was shocked and immediately cursed. Hey, what are you doing? Why are you grabbing me? You're ruining my good mood. I'm from the East Street. Do you know? If you know, then let me go. Damn. I spent 200,000 to buy that woman. Let me go, let me go. Chapter 49. The noise gradually faded away. Yun Shirshir struggled to sit up. She lifted her heavy head and looked around with her blurry eyes. She felt as if the world in front of her was turning upside down. Her entire body seemed to have lost half of its strength. It was hot and soft. Seeing that there was no one around, she couldn't care about where she was. This torture had already worn away her last bit of rationality. She reached out her trembling hands and painfully tore at her dress. At the door, a tall figure walked in. The man's imposing aura was intimidating. The moment his tall figure appeared in the suite, the entire world seemed to become small. With a pang sound, the door closed and the room was once again dark. In the large suite, there was only the sound of her rapid and suffocating gasps. The blurred breaths kept coming out from those bewitching red lips. It was accompanied by soft moans that made people's faces turn red and their hearts beat faster. It was so uncomfortable. It was so uncomfortable that it was as if there was a huge hole in her body that couldn't be filled. Her hands waved around in the air as if she was trying to grab something to fill it up. But she didn't know what this body needed. So empty, so empty. It was so empty that she felt like she was only left with an abyss. She reached out to touch her body and kept rubbing it. She wanted to stop that terrifying desire. But every time she touched it, her body would become numb and she couldn't control her excitement. Mu Yaja stepped through the darkness and slowly walked towards her. When he reached the bedside, he stood there and lowered his head. Under the retro light, the pure white blanket was wrapped around her waist. At this time, Yun Shirshir's clothes were already disheveled. Her black shoulder strap had slipped off her round shoulders. Her face was strangely flushed, and her eyes were seductive. Her hands tore at her dress with great force, appearing to be in extreme pain. Mu Yaja looked at her coldly but didn't make a move. His gaze gradually turned cold. He never thought that they would meet again in this way. That man said that he bought her for 200,000? What? Could it be that the remuneration he paid 6 years ago was far from enough? So much so that she didn't hesitate to sell her body for this kind of thing? Or was it that she had been like this for the past few years? And he was just the beginning of her using his body? Since then, how many people had touched her body? Mu Yaja's lips curled up in mockery. His clear and cold eyes contained a bone-piercing coldness and a hint of disgust. He turned around and wanted to leave. However, behind him, Yun Shirshir suddenly found the strength to sit up on the bed. She stretched out her arms recklessly and wrapped them tightly around his waist from behind, refusing to let go. Don't go. I feel terrible, save me. The man's body stiffened, and a fragrant and soft jade was stuck to his back. She greedily stuck her small face to his back, and the hands around his waist groped up and down without knowing the propriety. She gasped and murmured, "Don't go. Save me, save me. Help me." Mu Yaja could no longer take another step. He slowly turned around and Yun Shirshir took the opportunity to throw herself into his arms. Her hands tightly wrapped around his shoulders, and her weak and delicate body softly stuck to his body. It was as if this could comfort the lust in his heart. Only then did he realize that her delicate body was boiling hot as if her skin was being burned. Chapter 50. He was slightly startled and looked up in surprise. He reached out to hold her chin and turned her face over. Lowering his head, Mu Yaja saw that her eyes were blurred and deep. There was something wrong. Just as he was lost in his thoughts, Yun Shirshir clung onto his shoulders, leaned in, and eagerly kissed him on the lips. Mu Yaja narrowed his eyes and subconsciously tried to avoid her, but she hugged his neck tightly and did not let him avoid her. She broke into his mouth without any hesitation. She kissed him fiercely, but there was no technique. She was extremely inexperienced and even clumsy, and she was a little desperate. Just by relying on the raging desire in her body, she ravaged his cold thin lips as if she was possessed. Her teeth nibbled on his lips, and the tip of her tongue invaded his lips and teased him randomly. Her hot breath burned his breath. Even so, this kiss, which had no skill to speak of, still teased his body to the point where it was hard to endure. Yun Shirshir kissed him crazily. Her kiss slid all the way down to his moving Adam's apple. The tip of her tongue hooked and gently bit him. Mu Yaja's body suddenly stiffened, and a dangerous look faintly appeared in his eyes. But she was completely undecided. Her empty body was uncomfortably hot. After a series of movements, her shoulder straps completely slipped off. Her dress slid down to her waist as the two bodies kept rubbing against each other. That smooth and delicate body was suddenly exposed to the air. The breathtaking beauty caused his body to rapidly grow hot and dry. Mu Yaja looked down at the woman in his arms who was causing trouble. She did not seem to realize what she was doing at all. He always had good self-control and could even get married without touching a woman for 3 years. But now, he could not stand her instigation. Save me! Save me! The drug in her body was forcing her to seek more. Yun Shirshir opened her empty eyes. While he was in a daze, she anxiously reached out to buckle his belt and carelessly unbuckled it. Driven by her primitive instincts, she seemed to have forgotten herself. The man's sexy face was now covered in cold sweat, but he was trying to restrain the fire in his heart. His body had such a strong reaction to her. For more than 10 years, there was no lack of beautiful or enchanting women by his side. However, he was cold. No matter how the other women teased him, he did not feel anything. What he didn't know was that a man's body had a memory. Once he had tasted the beauty of the world, he would never be able to forget it. He didn't know what kind of magic was hidden in this woman's body, but she had the ability to make him crave for more. Yun Shirshir's trembling little hands were messing around in his arms, her movements rough and clumsy. She frowned slightly and followed her instincts, but in the end, she did not get the main point. Mu Yaja's throat tightened, and a numb feeling swept across his waist like an electric shock. This woman was deliberately forcing him to lose control. Hot. So hot. Help me, help me. Not knowing how to proceed, she kissed his thin lips with trembling hands, seeking his help. Hurry up and save me. Can you save me? It's so uncomfortable. Yun Shirshir straightened her body, her fair and beautiful arms slowly circling around his waist. Her breath, which smelled like orchids, brushed against his lips and completely destroyed his last bit of rationality. Mu Yaja raised his hand, and his 5 fingers suddenly threaded through her hair. His palm clasped the back of her neck, and her whole body was heavily pressed against him. He bit her lips fiercely, and his cold eyes focused on her face. Remember, this is what you said. Chapter 51. Yun Shirshir subconsciously followed her primitive instincts. Her hands tightly held onto his shoulders, as if she wanted to merge into each other's flesh and blood. The two of them intimately snuggled together without any gap between them. Heavily pressing her against the cold wall, Yun Shirshir couldn't help but gasp in pain. Mu Yaja lowered his head and kissed her lips, the tip of his tongue entering. At this moment, he couldn't help but sigh at the Creator's holiness and wisdom. The man he created was sexy and firm, while the woman was soft and charming. The perfect match between a man and a woman appeared at this moment. Mu Yaja tightly pinched her cheeks, as if to let her feel it. He purposely used force without any gentleness. He wanted her to wake up a bit. It would be best if she completely woke up, so that she could see who he was in front of her, and then see how he took her. He hated this woman. Hated her frivolity. If he didn't appear in time, what would have happened in this room tonight? If the person in front of her wasn't him, then would her charm blossom for another man? Thinking about it, he couldn't suppress his anger. Hugging her soft waist, he bit down on her lips with even more force. She was no longer a young girl who had just experienced sex, and she was no longer the undeveloped body from 6 years ago. After the breastfeeding period, her figure had already developed. His roughness caused Yun Shirshir to be in pain. She couldn't help but let out a moan. She was almost out of breath from this fierce attack. Her small hands tightly hugged his neck. Forgetting herself, her small tongue licked his earlobe. Her coquettish gasps were close to his ear, and he almost couldn't control himself. This damned woman. She was simply a demonized butterfly spirit, just like the evil concubines of ancient times who brought disaster to the country. His movements became more and more rough. Yun Shirshir was in so much pain that she kept gasping. She subconsciously pushed his shoulders and softly said, "Don't. It hurts. It hurts." What? Isn't this what you want? Mu Yaja sneered, but he was even more presumptuous. His strength didn't decrease at all, and he lifted her skirt with one hand. Pain. However, This intense pain was suppressed by the raging flames in his body. His body was unable to stop an indescribable restlessness from growing. Yun Shirshir helplessly hugged him even tighter. She was panting, and her watery eyes were misty. It was a mess that could not be any worse. It was so chaotic that she couldn't see anything clearly. She could only follow her instincts and keep asking. Lost in love. He held her firmly, but held back. He was not in a hurry to enter, as if he wanted to tease her. Grabbing her chin with one hand, he bit her lips fiercely and smiled wickedly. If you want it, come in yourself. The two of them pressed against each other intimately. The unparalleled sensory stimulation made her lose everything and even forget who she was. Her breathing quickened and her mind was in a mess. Following her instincts, she tightly held onto his shoulders and slowly lowered her body, until he was completely contained. As if the emptiness was filled, the sudden pleasure surged like waves. She couldn't help but raise her head and gasp for breath. There was a moment of clarity, but she sank into it again. Her body recovered very well. She hadn't been touched by anyone for 6 years. Everything was unbelievably beautiful. Under the influence of the drug, everything was spinning. Muyaja's throat tightened. In the midst of the numbness and entanglement, fine cold sweat moistened his thick black eyelashes. It was a perfect fusion. Both of them were extremely sensitive.